Hey, everybody.
Thank
We
you.
are live and Happy New Year. Welcome to Tone Talk with Marc Huzansky and Dave Friedman. Hope you guys had a Happy New Year. Tonight's guest is an awesome guest. First great guest of the year, Mr. Mike Soldano. Mike, how are you? Thanks for joining
Good,
us.
thanks. Hey, happy New Year, everyone. This is good. This is a honor to be on this show. This is going to be a lot of fun, I think.
Oh, it's an honor for us to have you.
Yeah, well, good, mutual.
Dave, what about you? How are you doing?
I'm fine. We're sort of in NAMM prep mode.
Oh yeah,
For the next
I remember that.
For the next sort of well, till NAMM.
Until now, and then like
starting now till NAMM, trying to finish products that aren't even close to done. Normal stuff.
Yeah.
Is it normally like a crunch right till the very end?
Yeah, no matter how prepared you want to be, you're never prepared, even if you say you're going to be.
That's right. That's how that works. It's always. I mean, when I used to do the NAMM show, that's the way it was, and I never could understand how every year I could never get it together. It's like, I know this is coming. I know how much of a pain it was the year before. Why can't I do it? But it's just the nature of NAMM, I guess. You just can't.
It's sort of part of the fun, right? Just kill yourself right till you get to NAMM, and then you go,
right.
And you relax. I always find actually getting at the show, even though the show's kind of long, rigorous 4 days, it's actually relaxing because you don't have to worry about anything else now. That's just right. Okay, let's just talk to people. Then it's all good.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
Well, you used to take my car, right? The hot rod. I remember you saying.
Oh yeah, I used to trailer a hot rod down there and stick it in the booth just to, keep up the kitsch factor and make it as fun as I could. You bet.
Yeah, that was great.
What kind of hot rod?
I've got a 1930 Model A Ford Coupe. It's like a 60 style hot rod, high boy style. It's got a 62 Olds 394 motor in it with 6 carbs. I mean, it's all built. I actually built it in the early to mid 90s, but I made it look as if it had been built in like 1962. So it's kind of my version of the American Graffiti Coupe, and it was purple, of course.
Right.
Yes, I remember that well.
That's awesome. Yeah. I love classic cars. Huge classic car fan.
Oh, cool.
Let's just talk about that tonight.
Yeah.
No problem.
I know people who would be into it in the chat too. Although some people would be disappointed, I think.
Oh yeah, probably very.
Yeah.
Still, we'll wait for part 2.
Yes. No. Well, as a matter of fact, I was just thinking, as you get older, for me at least, my bucket list car. What's the bucket list car that I wanted since I was a kid? And it's a '57 Chevy.
Awesome.
And I just always wanted one. So I don't know. I'm starting to look at pictures. Who knows? One day, in the next 5 years or so, maybe I'll be able to get one.
I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
Mine would be a 60s Lincoln Continental convertible black with suicide doors.
Yeah.
Nice.
I know exactly the one you're talking about. I know
exactly the 60s ones with the front end that are kind of a little older looking, like the little.
Yeah,
nice.
Yeah. And
those are a hot car. Yeah.
That's cool. Well, so Mike, you mentioned that you used to go to NAMM. You don't go to NAMM anymore?
Don't do NAMM anymore. No.
Okay. That's cool. Well, Gibson just
it never penciled out for me financially. It's one of those things. I mean, I think the NAMM show is cool. Don't get me wrong. And I think for the bigger companies, it's a necessity. What I found for myself, however, was that we would, for one thing, well, it was easier when I was still in California because I could just drive all my own gear down there, save a lot of money on transportation. And, we could even commute if we wanted to and not stay in hotels, although it was easier to stay in hotels. So
absolutely.
So the costs were manageable when I was still living in Southern California. But then, coming back up here, I continued to do the show, but now I had all these extra expenses. I had transportation costs. I had usually I had to take more people with me because they'd be there for the whole show. Whereas before, when we used to do it in California, I'd have a couple of my guys on maybe Thursday, Friday, and then have a couple more guys on the weekend, and everybody kind of take turns, and we just use the same hotel rooms. But when I started doing it from up here, we all would go down together, and it was kind of silly for to split it up. So with the airfare and everything else, it just got to be real expensive. And if I had sold a whole bunch more amps to offset that cost, I would have felt pretty good about it. But the deal is most of my dealers were smaller dealers that would call me up and order stuff anyway, and we'd talk all the time about new products. So they didn't really need to see me,
Right.
except to shake hands and say hi and swap a few stories. So it just, I never wrote a lot of orders at NAMM because everybody was pretty much tapped out by the time they got to my booth. And they'd be like, hey, I'll call you in April for my regular spring order. And I'd be like, great. And so why am I standing here now in January? So yeah, I just kind of quit doing it. Didn't affect my business whatsoever.
Yeah. You got to gauge it. Sometimes, it's worth it, and other times it's not.
Well, I mean, frankly, I don't think it. For the expense that we go through, I don't think it does anything for us either. Other than the fact, if you're not there, it's kind of, well, what happened to them?
That is a problem. Yeah.
There is a what happened to them thing, and
yeah, there is that. And I guess I was kind of lucky in that I didn't get too much of that backlash. And maybe it was just because when I quit going, I think the last NAMM I was at was like 2001 or something. So I have a feeling that maybe at that time people weren't paying so much attention, so that they didn't really seem to have that weird, like, oh my God, Soldano, they disappeared, Yeah. So I actually had in fact, what's ironic is the first year I didn't go to NAMM was actually a better grossing year than the 2 years prior. So, for me, it was like, oh, okay, I don't think I'm losing anything here. I'm missing.
Right. That's great.
That's funny. So before we go any further, you've got to explain the attractive woman behind you. There's a mannequin, I believe.
Yes, that's Mona the mannequin. That's our shop mascot here. I'm tethered by this cord here, but I could spin her around. You could see her, but yeah, I was. Funny thing,
the picture.
What's that?
Spin her around. We can't see it.
Oh, okay, hold on. Let me.
All I see is Elvira.
I wanted to fall. There you go.
Oh, okay. Here I am. I'm back again, plugged in and everything. Yeah. So,
what's the backstory there?
Well, it's funny. I was at an automotive swap meet years ago, right after I'd moved back up here from LA, and I was wandering around, and I came across this booth, and this guy was selling all kinds of, like, I guess they call it automobilia. It's like old oil cans and gas pumps that are all restored that you put in your living room and all that kind of junk.
Love that stuff.
And he had this mannequin in his booth, and she was dressed up in like some 1950s car hop, like American Graffiti kind of garb or something. And I was just there. I was kind of looking at it, and I was kind of going like, that'd make a great shop mascot, just something to throw in our ads or whatever. And he wasn't asking very much money for it. And so I was like, yeah, let's do it. So I bought a mannequin and brought her home, threw a Soldano t-shirt on, and the outfit she's wearing is one of the outfits that one of the models wore in one of my ads back in the 90s when I was still in LA. It was the ad for when I introduced the Hot Rod series of amps, and I had 4 girls around my Model A before it was finished. So I was still building the car, and I had the motor mocked up with a set of amp heads where the cylinder heads should have gone.
Remember that?
And the girls were all circled around the car, and they had wrenches and stuff. And they were all working on it, and so they were all dressed up in these cool little purple outfits. And so I just had some of that stuff left over, and so I thought, okay, mascot time. And then somebody donated the awesome sunglasses and the awesome leopard hat. So Oh, and then the beads came from a friend of mine who went to New Orleans to Mardi Gras one year. So, and the stethoscope, I'm not really sure what the origin of that is. Somebody, again, some friend of mine probably came by and just stuck that on there and was like, okay.
That looks
So,
good.
yeah.
Which reminds me, that actually
we don't take things too seriously here at Soldano, as you can see.
Hey, it's a relaxed environment. It's rock and roll, baby.
It's a very relaxed environment.
That's cool. And Dave, behind
Yeah.
you, we had a question recently about
The acoustic guitar?
the acoustic guitar. Yeah, someone.
Well, yeah. So, like, if I turn this up, there's
That
an
arch top
acoustic-
back there?
There's
Ooh,
a,
that's
no,
nice.
not that one. Or which
No.
one are they asking about? The one above the
the one above
sliding-
the one above the sliding door. Yeah.
Okay, the one above the sliding door is
there.
kind of a art project. It's an old 12-string acoustic that now has a Bigsby tremolo on 6 strings of it.
Cool.
It has a bell on the top if you're playing too fast. It has a water pipe coming out of the face of it. Stickers adorned and a whole bunch of other crap that people, sort of what you just said, that sort of added to it over the years.
I love it. I think it's totally awesome.
That's great.
It's frightening, but it's cool. The other old acoustic is funny, is a garage sale find, and boy, that thing's cool, that archtop thing.
Is that recent?
No, I've had it forever. It just happened to move hangers, so that's why it's hanging there.
Okay.
And it really needs sort of be fixed up because it's got strings that, I don't know, they're probably from the 40s or something on it, and or something like that. But boy, when you play it, it's got this just old, smoky, gritty, cool thing about it.
It looks cool.
If you can play it, you can only play it in
it.
the lower frets. Forget about the higher things, but
Yeah,
but it's totally got that old gritty blues sort of Robert Johnson-y kind of, thing about it. Place a little slide on it or something.
Yeah, I just say give it an open tuning and whip out the slide. That thing would be awesome.
Exactly. It sounds killer, actually.
That's cool.
Cool.
I think my ex-wife got it from one of my kids, and she wanted me to fix it up or something, and she gave it to me to fix up for them, and I'm like, they never got it back.
Sometimes that's the way it's got to be.
Right. That's too good. Too good
Never,
for the kids.
Never back.
So
no, it was too cool. I was like, no, I'm not going to have them break it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no.
Hey, I want to jump right in because we got a ton of questions. So the first one just seems most appropriate. I'm going to give it to Timothy Pierce, not Tim Pierce. We always go through that. Timothy Pierce wanted to know, Mike, how'd you get started? How'd you get started into this business? How'd you get going with making amps? And if you can give us some history on. Yeah.
When did you make that mistake?
Yeah. When did I steer off the tracks and go down the wrong road? Yeah, exactly. Well, it's a pretty long story, so I will try to condense it a little bit. But
Sure. Take your time.
So the way it started is when I first started playing guitar, for many years I've had zero money, so I bought just the cheapest guitar I could find in a local pawn shop. $30 I paid for it, and I started learning guitar, and immediately this friend of mine who was a much better player, who had been playing for a long time, told me I had to get a better instrument if I was going to get much further, because this thing had ridiculous action, and it just wasn't happening. So being the guy that I am, my number one mantra is basically necessity is the mother of invention. And so not being able to go out and afford to buy a good guitar, I figured, well, I guess I'm gonna have to learn how to build guitars, and I've always been pretty handy with my hands, and I've always enjoyed woodworking. So I found this little book for sale in a bookstore written by this guy named, I think his name was Donald Brosnack or something like that. Anyways, it said how to build an electric guitar. I figured that's all I need to know. And so I read his book, seemed to make sense. And I built my first guitar, and it turned out pretty cool. It weighed a ton. I made it out of cocoa and rosewood. So it was like a solid chunk of cocoa that weighed about 100 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of got me to the point where, okay, I have a nice instrument now, but my tone still sucks. So there must be another reason that, you know, this isn't happening. So by that time, though, I was much more interested in just being a guitar player. And so I had a good guitar under my belt. People saw it, they liked it. I built a few more guitars for my friends and whatnot. And I managed to make enough money building those guitars that I was able to actually just go out and buy an amp rather than having to, at that time, build one. So I I saved and saved and saved, and I ended up buying a 19, I think it was a 79 I ordered it. I got it in 80 though, but I got a Boogie Mark IIB because that was what all the rage was back in 1979 was the high gain boogies thing. And so that was cool, and I got it. I kind of liked it, and I started, you know, kind of honing my tone and getting my sound, but still there's something in the back of my head was like, you know, this thing's okay, but it's not doing exactly what I want to do, and it's not the sound I hear in my head that I want to be able to express. So I decided probably I was gonna have to figure out how to do something about that. So the earliest foray into that was I had the good fortune to meet Doug Roberts, and Doug is a friend of mine now. We've been friends for many, many years, but Doug is the son of the late Howard Roberts. And so he had moved up here to Seattle, and he and his brother Jay were putting a band together, and I was selling a Marshall JMP I had an ad for it, or I think maybe I had it in consignment or music. I can't remember now exactly. But anyway, I met Doug. Doug turned out to be an electronics wizard. And so we started chatting, and, you know, and he liked the fact that I built guitars, and I was really curious about what his electronics thing was all about. I ended up building him this really crazy heavy metal wraparound guitar that has a 3D body that if I could ever find a picture of it, I'd love to share it with people. But and we've got a real good friendship started from building that guitar. And so we built an amp together. We built two of them. I built one, he built one. And at that time, I knew a lot more about the mechanical aspects of building things like bending sheet metal, welding, hardware, and all that. But I didn't really have a lot of the electronics knowledge. I knew how to read a schematic, but I hadn't really designed anything from scratch. So Doug and I sat down, we built this cool amp, and it was okay. It sounded pretty good. It had a killer clean sound, but the overdrive, we used diode clipping, and it never really quite sat well with me. But it was a learning experience. I learned how to lay out a circuit board. Of course we did it all by drawing by hand on vellum and stuff. And so anyway, fast forward from that, it piqued my curiosity. I wanted to now know about how electronics work. So I started reading all these old radio manuals, like Navy radio manuals from the 40s, old textbooks from the 50s. And I basically spent about 4 years teaching myself electronics at night after my day job working in the auto body shop. And during that 4 years, I started tinkering, and I still have it around in the shop somewhere here. I built a little breadboard, you know, it's a piece of plywood, a bunch of terminal strips, mounted some transformers on it, built a power supply, and I just started tinkering. And the more I tinkered, the more I learned, and the more I learned, the more I really dug what I was doing. And mind you, this whole time, I'm totally just interested in building an amp for myself. I don't really have plans to do any of that. I want to be a rock star, right? That's the whole goal here. So I got better at building guitars too, and I built myself some really nice instruments. And at the same time, I was working on this amp design. So I finally got a design together that I thought sounded really good. And some of it was, I will admit, some of it was trial and error. And so some of the really cool things that happened in my amp were actually mistakes that happened that just happened to work out. So I don't ever profess to be a real rocket scientist. I'm just kind of more of a determined interloper, as if there's ever a description for what I do. Anyway, I did learn enough to do vacuum tube stuff. Don't ask me to design a MIDI circuit because I couldn't even tell you where to start. But I know vacuum tubes pretty well from all these dry and boring books I read. And so I built this amp, and it was pretty good. And so I decided just to commit to taking it off the breadboard, building it into a chassis, and I'd have my sound. And so when I got it all done, the only place I had to test it was I had to go to my friend's rehearsal hall. I didn't have any place at home that I could crank it up loud to hear it. And every time I would take it down to my friend Tommy's rehearsal room, we'd crank this up. And here, this was like Seattle, early 80s, right? And so the rehearsal halls here were not good. They were old warehouses and barns and whatever. And so every time we'd crank this up, because there was no soundproofing between any of the rooms, all the guys in the place would hear it. And so all the guitar players would come flocking down to Tommy's room and like, what's that you're playing through, you know? And it would be this amp that was this kind of Frankenstein looking thing, which it's actually was the very first SLO 100. And so guys would go, well, God, if you're building that, I want one of those, right? Well, you know how musicians are. They'll talk a good story, but push comes to shove, it doesn't sometimes always happen. So me being naive thought they really meant that. So I kind of broke the piggy bank, and I went and bought parts. And the thing about the transformers were they were designed by a local company here called DeYoung Manufacturing, and they had a brilliant engineer there who helped design the output transformer. Well, he did design the output transformer in that amp. I just told him what I wanted, and he worked with me to make this thing happen. And it's got some kind of magic juju, because even 30 years later now, it's still an amazing piece of iron. Anyway, so John designed this transformer, but DeYoung was, kind of told me like, well, we only build you one prototype set. You only get to buy one of each one time. After that, you've got to commit to some kind of quantity. And I think they really bent the rules for me, because they allowed me to buy as few as 10 pieces going in, which I don't know of any company that'll make you 10 transformers and give you a reasonable price. So I think they kind of felt sorry for me, like, oh, this guy's destined for doom, but we'll help him anyway. We don't want to strap him too badly. Anyway, bought the transformers, laid out some circuit boards, had them printed. And then I hand bent and welded and drilled and silk screened my own chassis, and I built 3 amps. And out of all those guys that were saying they would buy stuff, the only guy that came through was my friend Tommy, who had the rehearsal room. So he bought the very first SLO 100, serial number 86001. Thank you, Tommy. I still appreciate it to this day.
That's awesome.
And after that, I had these other 2 amps. What am I going to do with them? Well, one of them, I decided to keep one of the finished ones for myself, and I still had a third one. So I thought the thing to do would be, put it out there and put an ad in the back of, I think it was called, it was Guitar World. Yeah, they had those little, they looked like classified ads, and they didn't cost that much money. So I put this little ad you could mail to me, and I would send you a little, description of the amp and a snapshot of it, because, this is way before the internet or faxes or anything else. And that didn't really generate much. I got interest, but it didn't generate any sales. So I was thinking, like, I got to go somewhere where there's a really happening music scene. And Seattle's always had a happening music scene, but in 1983, 84, it wasn't really gelling yet here. I mean, there's a lot of talent, but nobody knew we were here. I mean, we were playing to all of our friends and sounding awesome, but it wasn't really, national. So I figured I had to go somewhere more where people come from all over the world to do stuff. And so there was 2 places in mind, New York and LA. Well, New York was too far away. LA was just down the coast. I could manage that. So my first foray into that was, again, being a pretty naive guy, was like, I called management companies in LA and said, hey, I understand you represent, well, Eddie Van Halen, and I'd get these people on the phone that I thought were actually like real people, but instead they were like receptionists or whatever. And I would make appointments to come down and demonstrate this amp. Well, so then I'd go to my boss at the body shop and borrow his van or whatever he had on the lot, because he also sold used cars, and so he'd always let me borrow stuff. So I'd always borrow a van, something I could camp in on the way down and back up. And I would jump in a van after thinking I'd made all these appointments. I would drive to LA to try to show people what I was doing. And I would arrive in LA only to be told, like, You were who? And you call us when? Oh no, I don't see anything. You know, hey, I just drove 1,200 miles. What are you gonna, what's up? So, but every time I made one, and so nothing ever happened, and I'd get often very frustrated and pissed off. But what I realized though from making those trips is there was a real music scene in LA that I'd never seen before. I mean, compared to Seattle at the time, it was just like, oh my God, this is really happening. So again, I still hadn't really committed to the idea I was going to build amps. I just wanted to sell just the stuff I had and move on with my life. It wasn't really like I'm going to make a business out of this yet. But at the same time, I was getting a little tired of working in the auto body shop. You know, I really dug my friends I worked with, and my boss was totally awesome. But the shop was unheated, and in the wintertime, it was kind of a drag working there. So in winter of 1987, I decided I'm going to do something really radical. I'm going to go to LA and see what happens. And so I jumped in my 38 Chev, threw all my stuff in the trunk, and drove to LA. I had a cousin that lived down there, so I had a place to land. My dad's cousin, actually, so my second cousin, I guess. Anyway, I landed at my second cousin's house. She put me up for a little while, and I came down to the idea that I would open a guitar shop building guitars. I would do amp repairs and custom built amps on the side. But when I got to LA, I realized you couldn't throw a rock without hitting a luthier. So I kind of scratched off the guitar part of it right off the bat and decided to concentrate on the amp stuff, because I didn't see that many guys doing the amp things at the time. I mean, there was Kasha. There was a few others whose names I forget now at the time, but there were guys doing it. But it seemed like there was room for, Frank Levi was there, you know, and so there was guys doing it. And Lee Jackson, yes, of course. Jose, yeah. I never met Jose, so I didn't know him. So anyway, I thought, okay, you know, I'll put up a sign. So I found a little place to rent on Melrose, and I'd had a little bit of, my dad had loaned me a little bit of money to get things started. And so I put up a sign and like, okay, folks, I'm here. Well, I sat there for about a year with pretty much nothing happening. But slowly but surely, a kid named Tony Antidormi came down from Canada, and he had somehow heard about me, and he came by my shop one day and said, hey, I'm going to sell your amps. And I go, I can't afford to pay you, but if you want to, that would be great, and I'll pay you a commission on it. Well, that guy went out and beat the pavement silly, and he finally got an amp in the hands of Steve Lukather. And Steve really dug it, and once he told all those guys up there at Andy Brower Studio Rentals that hung around Bradshaw and all those cats, man, the word spread like wildfire. And next thing I know, I'm basically in the amp biz. So that's how it all started.
Yeah, that's sort of where I didn't realize it was 1987 that was that you got there.
I got there in 87. Nobody even knew I was there till 88 though, because that first year was that I was doing sheetrock jobs for my second cousin on her apartment buildings that she owned. You know, I was doing just anything but working on amps for that first year, because it was just, I just had to make the rent on my little space.
Yeah, because I went to work for Andy Brower in 1988.
Oh my God, that's right. Okay.
Yeah. And so I remember your little shop on Melrose.
Yes, of course.
And I also remember the amp that Andy had of yours.
Yes, that's
the
right.
Very early one.
Yes, it was. It was serial number 6.
Right. Which then went to George Lynch.
Exactly. That's right.
Then I think George sold it to someone.
He did. He sold it. I think he sold it to.
But you
I'm
understand,
not sure about this.
He had to have that amp.
Yeah.
That particular one, because you made him one in recent times.
Yeah.
And he didn't like it as much. So in actuality, the person who had the amp, which was Hollywood Studio Rentals, now the buyer of Andy Brower's, it was like a cash deal and his newer Soldano to replace it. So
is that right?
They traded the amps, and plus like a couple thousand more cash.
Sure.
Meanwhile, I mean, I listened to the two amps, and I thought the new one sounded great.
They're identical. They're identical. I haven't changed
Well, there was
anything
some
all
different.
year.
I mean, the old amp had a bunch of carbon comp resistors that you used
That's
to
true.
use, so that
That's
it was a
true.
little different sounding, and the clean channel didn't have the crunch and
Yeah, didn't have the clean
didn't have
crunch
the
switch,
clean
but
crunch
when it,
switch,
it doesn't
and
matter.
so maybe a couple other little things, but yeah, basically it's the same circuit, but
Same circuit, same transformers.
Yeah.
It's the
But
same.
the other one was kind of vibey though, the original one,
Well, I mean, it's cool because it's old.
Yeah.
I tend to be a little more pragmatic about this stuff than a lot of these guys, in that I don't get too caught up in the nostalgia. I mean, I get caught up in nostalgic things, but not when it comes to my products. It's like, it's like the SLO is basically, I would have to say, it might be one of the longest running products in American manufacturing that has gone the longest time without any major changes.
Right.
Even
right.
Kleenex has evolved, crescent wrenches have evolved.
Yeah.
Brooms have evolved. But that amp, it's still
that amp hasn't evolved.
it hasn't evolved. It's the same old thing, but people, I guess, like that. So it's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So
Right.
the only thing we had to do is about maybe it's been 10 years ago now. I'm not even sure how long it's been, but it early on, like even still in the 90s, Mallory quit making the axial lead filter caps I was using, and they didn't offer them in the catalog anymore, but I managed to get them to continue to custom make them for us if I bought large enough quantities. So I just would make these huge commitments, and I'd get like 10 years supply of caps at one time, because that's the only way they do it. Wow. But after that initial time, when I went to reorder them again, they just plain were like, we're not making those at all anymore. Why don't you upgrade? So the one major change I had to make several years back is I went from axial lead caps on the power supply to modern, snap-in capacitors, which are 1,000 times better anyway.
Yeah.
And in the power supply, it's not going to affect the sound anyway, because capacitance is capacitance is capacitance, same value components, it's going to sound the same. So I just made a new power supply board. It bolts in the same way, so they're totally interchangeable. So if an old amp needs to be recapped, you just pull out the old board, drop in the new one, and call it done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was so then I'll throw some other trivia. So I actually bought so Bill Sunt was Bill Sunt, right? Was working.
Yeah, Bill Sunt, right.
And he owned a 150 watt Park amp.
That's right.
That had been modified, Soldano mod on it, and a Park cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
And I bought that from him.
I never knew that. Really?
Yeah.
Oh, hilarious.
And now, actually, I don't have it anymore. I wish I did. But the person who has it now is George Trips from Way Huge Electronics. He owns it.
Oh my God! How cool is that?
Who used to work? Who was my first employee? So
that is awesome.
What a
great story! Small world. I never knew.
Yeah, you don't remember? A long time ago.
Yeah.
And then you also had modified a Marshall that Andy Brower had that used to be in the rental fleet. That was a great amp, rented all the time.
Yeah, that JMP cool. I did. That's right.
Yeah, that was really cool.
So maybe people know this, but what was the basis for the SLO? I mean, what was was there, like you said, was it just accidental that you just discovered this this sound for it, or were you going for something when you were developing it?
Well, I was going for like what I call considered the ultimate rock sound. I was totally into the sound of rock and roll at that point in time. I guess for a lack of a better term, it would be the Sunset Strip rock sound. I hate that terminology or pinpointing it just to that, but that's what people understand it as, so I'll call it that. Yeah. Big hair and spandex, call it what you want to, but I really like that sound of just a really high gain guitar with unlimited sustain and yet still ballsy. I mean, you can have a lot of sustain, but I also like that chug when you hit the low string and you mute it, and it it's just that chunk kind of thing. And so I'd have to say that I was looking for, if you want to pigeonhole it as anything, I wanted a souped up Marshall is what I wanted, because the Marshall sound was definitely rooted, or I should say that rock sound was definitely rooted in Marshall amps. There's no denying that. However, I've never been happy playing a stock Marshall, even a JMP, which I think the JMPs were the best Marshalls ever made, and I've owned a number of them.
JMP as in master volume or 4-input?
Yeah, I like the master volume ones. Yeah, yeah. I just think those things, of all the amps Marshall made, or at least usable. I like the non-master ones if you're in a huge room and you're about, say, a quarter of a mile away from the speaker. then it's pretty playable. But other than that, it's just, they kill me. It's just too loud. But the JMP, you could actually turn it down and still get it, still get a pretty good sound at a pretty livable volume level. So I just thought those were neat amps. I thought they were pretty well built. So I kind of looked at those, as a foundation, I guess you'd say. But at the same time, though, from reading all these books and learning about all these weird circuits, I felt compelled to try everything in the books. So I had all these weird phase inverter circuits that I read about, that some worked and some didn't. Some just didn't have enough drive for a guitar amp. You could never get any power out of them without just really asymmetrical distortion that didn't sound good. But I always kept kind of circling back to that Fender Bassman / Marshall circuit, the simples. I even like the amp that Doug Roberts and I designed actually had 3-band active tube-driven EQ. So we had a 12AX7 for the bass, middle, and for each of the bass, middle, and treble. They had their own filter networks, and boy, talk about, you could sound like a graphic EQ. You could get so much Q on the EQ of those things because it was so like laser intense on this one little point of frequency. But it didn't sound natural. It was cool, but it wasn't that kind of mushy melding of the controls that you get with the classic tone stack. So during that 4 years of teaching myself electronics, the one thing I was doing was trying just these really ridiculous circuits just for the sake of trying them. But I always kept circling back to that basic Fender, probably Western Electric circuit, right, that became the Bassman, that became the Marshall. And for sheer simplicity, I still think that long tail phase inverter is the coolest circuit you can use for a phase inverter because it can do so much with so little. The only one that's simpler than that's the one they use in orange amps, which is the one where you use the same value plate resistor as you do cathode resistor, and you just pick up the signal across the tube. The biggest problem with those, though, is they don't have very much linear range. The minute the cathode cuts off, the whole thing gets really unbalanced, and it's weird. So it's not a very usable circuit unless you put amplifier stages after you do the phase split. So you use that tube, you keep the levels under control, you split it, and then you throw some, maybe a one stage of gain on the output of that before you drive the power tubes, and then you can actually get enough power to kick the tubes into high gear. Wouldn't you agree on that, Dave?
Yeah, the orange thing was always a little odd.
Yeah, a little weird, right?
But you're a big fan of those, though, aren't you?
Oh, I do like the old oranges, just because the way they're built
and stuff, and they're really cool.
They are really cool, and I've got a couple of them.
Those in your shop, and an old Univox amp.
Okay, the Univox was Bill's, yeah. So Bill had the Univox, and I had the oranges.
Right. Yeah, and
Bill had a couple
some of your guitars too, laying around there.
Yeah.
I just really trying to remember back. I'm like, oh yeah. I do remember.
That was a long time ago, my friend.
So all this stuff happened in a very short period of time.
Very short period.
Because you said 87, you got there.
Yeah.
I was there in 88, probably 89 is when I got to know you or knew, was around. And so really, I just didn't realize it was 87 that you got there. Really, all the notoriety came with like 3 years or something, probably, right?
Yeah, basically that's right. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because all those guys, like all those people that had the amps, like I remember Luke having an amp, and I remember, Andy and renting it, and then a whole ton of other people that were, man, I can't even remember them all.
Well, Warren
The guy from
Demartini.
Slaughter have stuff, and
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
Warren DeMartini came a little bit later though. Well,
Not
around 90 or something, or 91.
Yeah, probably around 90, 89 or 90. Yeah.
So who were some of the early artists?
Well, okay, so very early on, so Lukather, probably the first, pretty famous guy. And then shortly after he got his, the other A-list guy you called to be on your record in LA was Michael Landau.
Oh yeah.
And so Landau heard Luke's amp, and so he was pretty early on to get one. And then let's see, then who was okay? Let me tell you what, I'm gonna turn around right here and I'm gonna get the early serial number list. Maybe it'll help jog my memory a little bit.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, that'd be super cool. Holy crap.
Yeah, let me just pull this thing up here.
I love that. By the way, we got 222 people watching right now.
Wow.
Hi everybody. Yeah,
What's
so this will be a little trip down memory lane even for me. I have not looked at this list in probably about 100 years, so this will be fun for me as well as so.
Oh wait, here's one for you. There's funny thing in the chat. Bruce Egnetter chimed in, and who's on the chat? Hi, Bruce.
Hey, Bruce.
He goes 33K cathode resistor, happy mistake, or Soldano genius.
Oh, it's genius. It's sheer genius. Of course, I planned that all along.
Okay, that told me.
No, actually, that big. It's a 39K, by the way, but
yeah.
that big resistor was part of the plan, because what I was noticing when I was fiddling around on my scope, and trying all these weird circuits, I noticed that I would get clipping. Okay, so I would clip it really hard on the plate resistor of the first stage, but then when it went into that second stage, of course, everything inverts, and it would just it was kind of I was always getting one. My waveform was looking lopsided. I was getting one side that was clipping much harder than the other. So what I did to even it up, I put that huge cathode resistor in there so I could get the cathode to clip earlier, so that now both sides of the waveform as it came out of that second stage were both clipping at about the same amplitude and pretty symmetrical, because I felt that the more symmetrical I could get the waveform to look, the better it would sound. And of course, that was at that time I was just guessing at that, but it seemed to work. So there actually was
genius.
Huh?
There you go.
Genius.
There was a plan. Yeah.
So there was a reason, because I just kept upping that value. I started with a 10K, just like a Marshall has, and I just kept pushing it up until I could get that waveform to kind of like even out to where they were both clipping on the same.
10K would be sort of the logical value, judging from the rest of the amp. It's like an extra gain stage at that point in front of a JMP. Sort of
right.
roughly
exactly.
in the rough thing. So that's sort of the architecture of the amp.
Right.
And then you just like massage the parts around that.
Exactly. I just massaged it because I wasn't getting what I wanted, but I kind of felt I was onto something, and so I just kept working it. So
it's basically a boost stage in front of a kind of a JMP, but with some radical changes in parts values.
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly. Yeah.
Which is all any of it is really is. This is a boost stage in front of something. Like
that's right.
The architecture is like, it's just how many boost stages do you get to the end of the Tootsie Pop, No,
that's right. And
for some reason that popped in my head when I was saying that, and I just was like,
But that's it. I mean, that's really all it is. It's a pretty simple formula, and like you say, it's pretty much how many stages you decide to have. I've always kind of felt that my philosophy has been use a few more and don't clip any one of them too terribly hard, so that you kind of retain some more of the fundamental harmonics and keep a little more of the purity of the note. But just kind of like the difference between maybe having a car with a 5-speed transmission and having, say, a car with a power glide where it just shifts from low to high gear and it's one big jump. And
Eddie Van Halen took that idea and expanded upon it by like 3 gain stages. So
Right. Yeah, that's like gain for days and days and days.
and then some more.
Yeah.
So yeah,
let's
you
go
get
to
your
that
serial
list.
numbers.
Let's go to the list. Yeah. Tell
Yeah.
us.
So anyway, so here it is. As you can see, it's a little frayed and it's
Oh, that's
typewritten.
awesome.
That is
And
awesome.
it's on my old letterhead from my old shop. And this is the only copy that's in existence. And it's just an old paper thing. So yeah, we've got, God, how could I have forgotten this? Okay. So before Luke got his amp, actually I sold one to Brad Whitford from Aerosmith.
Oh,
Wow.
really?
And the way that happened was, a guy who has now become very famous in his own right, Gary Hoey, but at the time was just a young kid that came to Hollywood to play guitar with many others. He had come by my shop early on, really liked what I was doing. We became friends. And so one day he came by my shop in his old Toyota and says, "Hey, we're going to go see Aerosmith." And I'm like, "Well, I don't have any money." And he's like, "You don't need any money. You're going with me. And I know Brad Whitford." And I'm like, "You don't?" He goes, "Yeah, we're both Boston buddies." And I'm like, "Okay, this sounds like fun." So I jumped in his car with him and his girlfriend, and he told me to bring an amp along, and we drove down to Costa Mesa for the show. And we got there early on purpose, and we came up to the gate, and Gary just bullshitted his way in there. I swear to God, he just completely bamboozled the guard. The guard's like, "What are you guys doing here?" And Gary's like, "I'm here to see Brad Whitford." And the guy's like, "Yeah, right." And then Gary's like, "We brought his amp," and he points this amp I'm holding, and the guy's like, "Oh, really?" And he's like, "Yeah," to this day, I
complete
love
bullshit.
what he just bamboozled this guy, and he got us in. We got in and we went backstage, and sure enough, Brad did know him, because at that point I was beginning to wonder myself if he really knew him or not. And Brad stuck the thing on top of a 412 cabinet backstage, played about 3 notes out, and goes, "This is pretty cool. Let me think about it." Next thing you know, he has his tech take it out, take his Marshalls down, put it up on stage, and he played it live in front of this huge crowd for the first time he ever played it for the whole show that night. Guns N' Roses had opened, and then after the show was done, we went backstage and chatted him up, and he's like, "I'll take it." And so one of the tour production people took me into a trailer, gave me a handful of cash, and I left there minus an amp and with money in pocket. So that was really exciting. And again, Gary, thank you so much for thinking of me and taking me there. I still remember that fondly, in case you were watching for any reason. So that was.
I did rack work and stuff for Gary. Maybe probably God had to be back around that time frame. Maybe a little after. Maybe a little after when he was playing in a band with Frankie Benali.
Okay.
Which I don't remember what year that might have been.
Yeah,
right around the corner from my shop right this minute. So I don't remember. I don't remember if he had some of your product in his rack. I can't remember now.
Well, he might have had his rack. I did build him a rack mount SLO, but I can't remember.
I think that might have been it.
Yeah, I can't remember how early he had gotten that, because the very, very first rack amps I built were for Vivian Campbell.
Yeah.
And that came shortly after Luke getting his amp. So
right.
So Luke got his, then Andy Brower bought his right after Luke. The famous 87006, yeah. And then Aldo Nova got one, which I didn't sell it to him. So he got it through somebody. I can't remember how he acquired that. I mean, I know we built it, obviously, but I don't remember ever talking to him directly. So somebody might have been in the middle on that. Although, again, I don't remember a lot of things, so maybe I did talk to him. But Vivian, he got the first rack ones, which I designed in no time at all, because he called up because, "Well, I really like that amp that Luke got, but can you make it rack mountable and can I have a preamp out?" And I'm like, "Give me a week or two." And that's like I designed that whole chassis and figured it all out in like literally weeks time. I mean, I think I had it to him in less than 2 months or something.
Yeah, I remember those amps too. Yeah.
Yeah. I've still got one left in my collection, but they sell for they sell for pretty good money on eBay, I guess. Oh yeah, so then Landau got his just after Viv's, and then Steve Stevens. And about that same time that I'd gotten the call from Vivian, I got a call from Lou Reed, and that became a really long relationship I had with Lou. Lou probably out of everybody has owned more of my gear, or had owned more of my gear than anybody on this planet. I mean, anytime I'd come out with something new, he had to have it. I built him some custom built stuff. He was a huge fan of my stuff, and he was a really great guy to work for because he knew exactly what he wanted, and he had ears like you couldn't believe. He could hear stuff that I couldn't even hear. I mean, he was really amazing talent. Some people like him, some don't, but
Lou Reed,
I gotta say, Lou was awesome. Yeah, Lou was awesome. Yeah.
Totally.
And then after that, shortly thereafter, Mark Knopfler came along.
Yeah.
And then I had a friend of mine who was he took care of stuff for Herman the German in the Scorpions. And so my friend Randy turned Matthias of the Scorpions onto my stuff. And so Matthias got on board fairly early as well. And again, SLOs. And then around that time, I picked up Danny Korchmar, and then Steve Ferris from Mr. Mister, if you remember that band.
I remember that band.
Then,
I remember that amp.
Yeah, you might. Yeah, and then at about that time, Steve Stevens had quit doing Billy Idol. And so Billy then was using Mark Youngersmith as his guitar player, who used to be Charlie Sexton's guitar tech. And Charlie had fiddled around. I used to loan Charlie
SLO. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember Charlie. I remember that early stuff, and I remember he had that.
Yeah. So and I used to let him borrow stuff when he used to tour and everything else. And so Mark actually got some interesting stuff. He got one rack mount SLO 100, but then he had a Bradshaw rig, and what he had been using is he was running high watts left and right for his power amps. And so he wanted to put everything in a rack though. So what I did is I took some of my SLO chassis, and then I made a perf board circuit board, and I built two clones of DR103 high watts using my transformers and my 6L6 power section DR103 high watt preamp, and I built him a pair of those to use as his clean power amps for his left and right.
I remember that, yeah, because I think they stored for a while at Andy Brower's.
Oh, I'm sure they did.
I remember those specific amps for sure.
Yeah.
And so Dave Turner has some of that now.
Yes, yeah. Dave bought some of those. Yeah, he's a real collector. Yeah,
he's got a bunch of your stuff. Yeah,
he does. Yeah, he's an awesome guy, like Dave. In fact, remember we hung out at the barbecue place that time when I was down there for.
Oh yeah, we went to Hogley Wogley's. Tyler.
Yeah, Dr. Hogley Wogley's.
Yeah, man.
Us fit barbecue out in Pacoima. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, I do remember the amp show you were at.
Yeah, that one up there. The one that.
L.A. amp show. Yeah.
Yes, the L.A. exactly up there at the airport by the airport. Yeah. And so then I'm kind of like, so I guess you're right. I guess Warren Demartini did come a little later on because he's kind of over it's still in 1988, but it's late in the year. And prior to him was Warren Cucurullo. He got one of the very first X88 preamps, aside from the one that Lukather had, which was the prototype. So I think Warren got the first production version. And then and about that time
Landau got a preamp too early in 80, around that time probably, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. And then right around that spring of 88, so earlier in the year, Mark Knopfler went on tour doing a Farm Aid kind of thing. And he did this whole Farm Aid tour thing, which was, big successful, MTV aired it and all that stuff. And in his band, his second guitar player, his rhythm guitar player, was Eric Clapton, right? So Marc has his band with Eric on other guitar. It's not second guitar, other guitar.
Yeah.
So probably as a reciprocal deal, then that year when Clapton went on tour, he took Marc out as his guitar player, right? And so they were in rehearsals, like somewhere, I can't remember where now. I think it was in Texas or something. And I got a call from this guy named Lee Dixon, who was Eric's guitar tech. And he's like, this is Lee Dixon. I'm calling on behalf of Eric Clapton, and we want to get some of those amplifiers you make. And I'm like, oh my God, because Clapton's one of my hugest heroes, right? Wow. And so I'm like, I could just die today and be a happy man. And the reason I believe that he was getting these amps was because here they are rehearsing together, and Marc has his brand new SLOs, and he's just killing Clapton's red knob Fenders, and so I'm like, I'm on it. So, but unfortunately, I was out of parts at the time, so there was a time delay. So they started the tour, and Eric borrowed one of Marc's, because Marc had 2 amps, so Eric borrowed one of them, and then I got these things done and got them shipped them out to him on the road. And like I say, that was just like, I was just like, okay, I can quit building stuff now because I sold an amp to Eric Clapton and I'm done, And that year when they came through LA, they played down, and I think it was down in, was it Irvine Meadows? I think it was Irvine Meadows. Anyway, I got to meet Clapton, and I was just, God, I was as giddy as a kid his first day of school or something. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was sitting there talking to
as you should
Eric Clapton, man. I was, and he was really super cool, nicest guy. He was so. I mean, he had a million A&R people and all those kind of cats that all wanted to talk to him. Yet he took time out, sat me down, talked to me, and it was really awesome. So that was a lot
super cool.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I still remember that.
So the time frame. When did the X88 come out? That was your second product.
Yeah, that was the rack amp. I guess the rack SLO was sort of the second product, but it was still the SLO.
Because Bruce Egnator asked a question again. He goes, "When did Mike actually expand the line beyond the SLO?"
Yeah, probably. Gosh, that must have been. I'm going to say that happened probably like in the spring of '88.
Right.
Like I probably sat down to that's when I probably built that prototype for Lukather.
Mm-hmm. I remember that well.
You know what? Actually, no, I remember. No, it was wintertime. So I think I built the prototype starting like maybe in December of '87, and then it probably was done in '88, and then I went into just laying it out and making a production version that spring. So probably the production ones probably started hitting the street probably around early summer of '88.
Yeah, that makes sense with the timeline. I remember like when I first moved there, and Luke had the prototype already in his rack with an H&H power amp and all that, and then Landau had one too already at the same time. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, and then you made some power amps too, right?
Yeah. So then later,
monoblock rack mount power amps.
Exactly, and I think I made the first one of those maybe like early '89, and basically again I just took the SLO power section, built a little simple drive circuit for the front end of it, made a different front panel that just had 2 holes, just a volume control and a presence knob, and I built those monoblock power amps so you could have the whole basic setup that way.
Yeah, because I think Landau had some of those also.
I think he did, as a matter of fact.
Because if I recall correctly, I remember the Tales from the Bulge record that he did. I could be wrong, don't quote me, but I think I recall he slaved an old Marshall through some effects into that power amp, and that's what appeared on the record. Now I could be wrong with that, but.
Yeah, and I don't remember because I was never around like any of the recording sessions or anything like that, but that sounds totally doable because I know that he and Bob were always working on the rig and changing things up. So it sounds very plausible to me.
Yeah.
That's cool. And I saw I spied over there that there was Aldo Nova. You meant that was on the list there early on.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had serial
Aldo
number.
Nova.
Yeah, Aldo
Yeah.
Nova had serial number 87008.
Wow.
So he had a very early
Wow.
amp.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So basically, yeah. So for everyone, it was a very short period of time, like I said. So from the end
Very
of
short.
87 through, when did you leave LA?
So I left LA in 94.
So in this short period of time, every major like star and guitar player got one of these amps, pretty much. Like
Pretty
for the
much.
most part.
I was pretty
because the how what I deem Mike as is he was the originator of the boutique hot rodded guitar amp.
Oh,
Yep.
you're too kind.
No, but it's true.
Yeah.
It didn't exist before 1987. You had hot rodded Marshalls that people were hot rodding before that, and people were using mostly Marshalls and stuff. But you didn't have a hot rodded boutique brand of an amp other than, okay, well, you could say
Maybe Mesa Boogie.
You could say Mesa Boogie before that, but Mesa Boogie, it wasn't the hot rodded sort of based in Marshall land kind of.
No, it was more like a
Boogie
souped
was
up
a
Fender.
totally different thing.
Right.
A souped up Fender.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, it was a Fender
I really
with-
sort of started with Boogie for the boutique brand. Let's give that to them. But
Yeah,
really
for
the very first hot rodded Marshall boutique brand was Mike.
Well, thank
Yep.
you.
I don't think I'm wrong there either. So
Well, I will
could be
humbly
forgetting
agree.
someone, but I'm pretty
That's
sure
awesome.
that was correct.
So when did
You paved the path for all our misery.
Well, actually, there's I think there's somebody before me, and that would be Paul Rivera.
Yeah, okay. Sort of. Yeah, well, yeah, I
maybe
guess
that's,
so, huh?
maybe that's the same notoriety.
I don't look at his amps still as like sort of, even though some of it is sort of Marshall-esque based on his amps, I still kind of look at him rooted a little more in Fender land than Marshall land.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with you.
I guess Paul Rivera was the first, amp hot. He was like the first amp hot rodder guy.
Yeah,
He was
definitely.
kind of the first amp hot rodder. And then I think at one point in time, Lee Jackson worked for Paul Rivera.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I'm pretty sure that's how that came about, because a Lee Jackson mod is basically a tweaked Rivera mod.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
So what he did was basically what Paul was doing, but kind of took it a little bit further.
Mhm.
So that's where that came from. And yeah, okay, yeah. So I guess Rivera, but when did Rivera first come out with his? And I guess
I
that was
don't
mid-80s
know.
or something. His own amps, maybe the rack mount amps, those big things. I remember Scorpions had them.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Before Soldano, you. So yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Let's give it to Paul. I guess Paul is the first boutique brand. I'm wrong.
All right, that's
The first really hot rodded popular
Marshall
S brand with mass popularity was Soldano, though, I think.
Yeah.
Now, when did you work with Van Halen? What year was that?
That must have been I'd say that must have been 89.
Yeah.
And it was pretty hilarious because the story around Ed trying my stuff the first time is really funny. It's Valentine's Day. My girlfriend has made big plans. She's gotten us a room down at what was that fancy old hotel on Sunset there? Chateau. What's the
Chateau
name of it?
Marmont.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
it. So she'd gotten us a room there, which I guess she had to really jump through hoops because of course everybody wants a room there on
That's totally cool. Yeah.
on Valentine's. So she's got all these great plans, right? And I'm stoked.
no.
This
How
is
did
gonna
you
be a
fuck
great
this up?
evening. I get a phone call in the afternoon, like at 3 in the afternoon. It's Eddie. And he's like, "Hey, I've heard a lot about these amps of yours, and I want to try one out." And I said, "Great, tomorrow come on down. We'll talk about it, or give me a call back or something." He's like, "No, I want to try it tonight." And I said, well, God,
Oh, no.
I'm really excited to do this with you, but I gotta have to be somewhere. He goes, well, how much longer are you gonna be there? And I said, well, not long. And he says, I'll be there in I think he said something like, I'll be there in a half an hour. And I'm thinking like, it's rush hour starting to build. He's over in Coldwater Canyon. There's no way he's going to be here for.
Have you seen him drive?
Well, apparently he drives really fast because he got there in no time. I've driven that road, or back then I'd driven that road for
100 miles an hour.
It takes a long time. Yeah, he pulls up in this like Chevy Cyclone. I think it was or GMC Cyclone. It's in the 80s. It was either Chevy or GMC had a pickup truck that had a 454 in it. It was basically a hot rod pickup. These things were really fast trucks, and he had one of those. He pulls up in front of my little tiny shop on Melrose, and I swear to God, the truck looks like it's drooping from the exertion. Like, it's just been flogged as hard as any vehicle can be flogged. And he jumps out. He goes, hey, here I am. I want to take one of those amps home and try it out. And I'm like, sure enough. So here it is. It's now 5 or something in the afternoon on Valentine's Day, and I'm loading a truck or an amp in the back of Ed's truck, and he's back off to 5150 to go do some shredding. And then I'm on my way to Sunset for some fun with the girlfriend. So it was really hilarious because, like I say, this couldn't this wait even 24 hours or 12 hours? No, right there.
You got the idea.
He called me the next day and he was just giddy.
Yeah. I remember that era. Yeah, I remember when he had those he had a couple amps. He had a turquoise one.
Yes, that's right.
Boa.
It was like turquoise ostrich. He told me he wanted the ugliest covering I had, and that was what I had.
I don't know if that was that ugly though. I mean, like,
I thought it was cool looking. I didn't think it was ugly at all.
No offense, but I find maybe the snakeskin uglier. the traditional black and white snakeskin. I mean, I thought that
turquoise ostrich looked really cool. Now he also got one that was pink ostrich, and that one.
I remember that one too.
Yeah, that one was ugly.
That was ugly.
That one was ugly. Yeah,
but hard to get probably at the time. Pink ostrich.
It was this company called Summers Plastics over on the East Coast, which is who I was buying all my vinyl from, and they would just send me these sample books, and at that time they made hundreds of different things, and so we would often just buy these things just to do something weird or different, and so that's kind of how that came up. He said, I want something really ugly, and I just went and picked out the pink ostrich and ordered a few yards, and we covered that amp in.
What about the stripe? He still has both those amplifiers.
Awesome. I'm happy to hear that.
He never sold them. I doesn't really use them, but he's never sold them. He doesn't.
That's awesome.
I think I asked once about getting, or maybe I asked for someone about getting one of those amplifiers off him, and they didn't want to sell them.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that.
He still has it. At least that I know, he still has it. I mean, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. He was a really nice guy. He was really fun to hang around.
He's a sweetheart. Yeah.
Yeah, he really is.
Yeah. Did he bring a 6-pack of beer with him?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Then he showed me his Lamborghini Miuras because he knew I was into cars, and man, those things were just gorgeous. Very cool cars.
Wow. Yeah, he's still a car guy. He loves cars. He loves racing.
Yay,
I drove with him once, and yeah, that's.
Well, judging how fast he got to my shop that day, I can believe he drives really fast.
He drives well, though. I mean,
good.
But extremely fast. But I tend to think that the time I drove with him, he wasn't. He was, say, under the influence, probably.
Yeah, that gets scary when that happens. Yeah,
that's not good. Well, there's a picture of him with, I believe the purple one, and then there's also a striped Soldano as well. At least a picture. Was that made by you guys, or maybe he just striped it up himself?
Somebody asked me about that recently. And I kind of think that we might have done that for him. I think we covered an amp in white Tolex, and then we just taped it off and got like that vinyl spray that you use to change the color of your car interior.
Yeah, here's
And I
the
think we
picture
used
of it.
vinyl spray and we sprayed it up.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, there you go.
there
Yeah,
it is.
That's
So
it.
I think we did that one, but I'm not sure. Maybe he did that, or maybe we had him tape it and we sprayed it. I don't remember now.
Right.
Yeah, I think so. Then in that case, he would have had 3.
Yeah, he did have 3 because I believe he gave one to his producer.
Oh, okay. Ted Templeman?
Yes, Ted. Yes, exactly. I think I remember somebody telling me
went
that.
somewhere. I don't think the stripe one exists anymore. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's
Or
cool.
it exists somewhere, but I don't.
Yeah, it's somewhere out there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'd love to have it. So I'm going to jump into some questions that we had from Facebook, if that's cool.
Oh, sure.
With you, Mike.
Cool.
Someone mentioned Gary Moore was a big player of your
Gary
stuff.
Moore, yeah. And what's really interesting is I never got to meet him. I always wanted to, and I never had. And here's what's really interesting. He just went and he walked into one of our dealers in England, just bought the things. He didn't even try for like the artist deal or anything, or call us up or anything like that. He just went and saw him at a music store. I believe it was Chandler's Guitars in England. Went in and just plunked down some cash and bought the things.
And then you had Warren Haynes too, right?
Yeah, Warren's he's been using my stuff
still
since.
uses it. Yep.
Yeah, still does. Yeah, he's been using it since he was playing in the Allman Brothers at the time, and I think he got those probably in like 91 or 92. And he's been a real ambassador for the SLO for a long time. I mean, you just go to one of his shows and there it is. So
it's always the
and he's another really great guy, super sweet, really a nice person. Really like him.
That's awesome.
Great player too. He's fantastic.
That question, by the way, was from Max Kosech about Gary Moore. And then Justin Hedrick said his favorite Soldano user is Matt Pike from High on Fire.
Oh yeah, Matt. There's a guy who's not afraid to turn up that master volume.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah, Matt's awesome. He's great. And boy, if you want to hear a Soldano being put to its absolute limits of what it can do, he's the guy to do it. Man, it's a sonic assault in a good way.
Yeah, it's like I never saw Steve Stevens with any of this your Soldano, but you say he had one. Steve today plays my amps and Steve plays the master volumes are on about 6.
Wow.
That's
loud.
That's full volume. Anything after that is just more saturated. So
yeah, that's right. That's kind of way
that's full volume, and I'm like, oh, Jesus. But that's the way it's always been for him.
Yeah,
you know?
That's Tone City.
And loud. That's the way it's always been. So
he's a great player. I really like the way Steve plays.
Oh, he's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Dougie Licks Manross asks, he wants to hear about how you hooked up with Warren Demartini.
I don't remember exactly, but I think it was just Warren called me up one day and just like, hey, I want to get some of these amps. Can you bring one up for me to try out? Because I do remember that I drove up to a rehearsal place and it was somewhere in North Hollywood, but I'm not exactly sure I remember where. And
maybe?
Might have been Mates. Yeah, might have been. And he was like just this super nice guy. And he's like, yeah, I've heard about these. I think he heard about them from Lynch. I think he had heard George's amp, and he's like, he just wanted to try one out. So I brought up a head and he plugged it in, and I think they were rehearsing or something. He cranked it up and he invited me to stick around and listen for a while, and they rocked it out for a while. And he was like, I want some of these, and so he ordered some. It was great. Yeah,
he's played them ever since.
And he's played him ever since. Yeah, he really likes him, and he's one of my favorite players of that style of rock, because he's got this really cool phrasing and he's just he's very tasty.
Cool swing to him and cool, like feel and vibe.
Yeah, exactly. A really good feel player. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Plus a super nice guy to boot. Just I've hung out with him a few times.
Yeah, I loved his tone from back then. I mean, you know, all the stuff. He always had, just like we say before, Dave, you always say it's in the hands.
Yeah.
And there's something with Warren. There's, you know, there's something with his hands.
Yeah, I don't think the Soldano appeared on a record though till later. So all the '80s records were old Marshalls and stuff.
Yes, they were. Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Old
exactly.
Boosted and
boosted, yeah.
Cranked and Marshalls. But I guess the reason that he got Mike's amps, from my understanding, was because he was tired of having reliability issues with, you know, cranking a 100-watt Marshall on 10, and it's abused for a while, and it's you know, blows up every so often.
Yeah. Power amp distortion takes its toll on amps, you know.
Of course, these days, tubes just blow up for no good reason.
Well, that's right.
Except maybe for you, because you use 5881s.
Yeah, and they're nice and reliable.
Nice and reliable. For me, oh Jesus.
Yeah. No, I know. I feel for anybody using any tube other than these 5881s.
Yeah, I honestly,
these are reliable.
I just EL34s. Yeah, I went through a big fiasco with that recently. I think we were talking about that.
Oh
yeah.
So just like two brands just shit the bed basically. And I just had to go to something else, and seems to be okay so far.
Good.
But you can use 5881s, Dave. You said
you can use 5881s in any of my amps if you want.
You just got to rebuy them.
And actually, they do sound good. And in fact, one of my amps has 5881s, and I think maybe future amps might also. Just because I'm sick of dealing with the problems.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, and I just was talking to another for the Synergy amp company. I was just who Mike Avi's involved with, and the modular thing. Of course, you know about it. You have a module with him.
Yes, I'm getting one. Synergy SLO.
So we were talking about that with the 50-watt amp that's coming out, and the 30-watt amp coming out has 5881s in it. And I was talking with Peter, who is now the head engineer over at Boutique, who's my friend, and we were talking about it, and I'm like, you know, these amps haven't come out yet. Why don't we just put 5881s in them?
There you go.
The power amp has 5881s. The little amp has 5881s. Why not the 50-watt amp? Why does it have to have EL34s? It doesn't have to. It doesn't exist yet in the public. So we'll see. I think that maybe.
Yeah.
I think you'll be happy if you make that choice, because boy.
I think Well, I won't necessarily be happy, but Avi will be happy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, does it change the tone that much?
It's a little less compressed than EL34. Maybe it's a little
less. The low end is different.
The low end is a little different. The EL34 is actually a little more, believe it or not, a little more scoop sounding of a tube. It's a little more compression to it.
Yeah, it's spongier.
Spongier. 5881 is a little more even and a little more solid in the mid-range frequencies. Not mid-rangey, but a little more solid in those frequencies.
Solid, yeah, correct. Yeah,
like
I agree.
So, you know, the funny thing is, what you can do, you can put two amps and you can put the tubes in it, and you can turn the dial slightly on the preamp tubes, use an amp switcher, switch between them, and get them to sound the same. And you can get them to sound the same. Your settings might be slightly different. So you might have a little less mids on the 5881 setting, a little more on the EL34 setting, and maybe you'll have and I'm talking little bit turns, not huge turns.
That's
you
right.
might have a hair more gain because the compression is a little different. You might have a hair more gain set, but it's kind of minor changes. You can dial them in to be the same.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, that's cool. That's cool. John Priest has a great question, and I know we've had several people in the chat asked about this as well. If you can
John
talk,
Priest.
do you know him?
From England?
I don't know. Well, I don't want to switch here. Let me first ask the
That's
question.
okay.
I'll let you know. He wants to know about your Stevie Ray Vaughan connection, and if you can tell the story about the amp that you were building, and the whole story behind that. If you can go into that.
Yeah. So here's what happened. I, being of course, we're all big fans of Stevie Ray, and so back in the day, I went and saw him at the Greek Theater, and again, this must have been.
Shit, I was there.
Yeah, you were probably there, right?
I was actually there. Was
Yeah.
BB King opening up?
What's that?
BB King opened up?
Yes, as a matter of fact.
Oh, we were at the same show.
Yeah. So I can't even remember how it happened, but I was fortunate enough to get to meet him after the show. Somebody I was either who had gotten us the tickets or was a friend of my girlfriend's or a friend of somebody that was with us. I don't honestly remember anymore who it was, but somebody got us backstage at that show and I got to meet Stevie. And so we were starting to, I introduced myself and I told him, I build guitar amps. You might have heard of me. And he's like, yeah, I've heard of you, but I don't know much about your stuff. And we had a really nice conversation and I think somewhere in the conversation, he was kind of like, well, I'd like to hear, what you do. And I was like, well, I don't know if I have anything exactly what you'd like, but I kind of have an idea what we could build for you. And I'd like to maybe throw something together and let you try it out. And if you like it, great. And if you don't, it's a good learning experience for me kind of thing. And so, I came back and kind of, put on the thinking cap and sort of sat down and, discussed it with, my friend and tech at the time, Bill Sunt. And we were like, what could we do for this guy? He kind of has that Fender Strat thing going on. So it'd be kind of cool if we could kind of voice the amp a little bit more towards what that's all about. And then, of course, the SLO has a really solid power section. So I figured we had plenty of headroom. We could base this on an SLO. So what we ended up doing is building an SLO that had a switch on the back that would allow us to scoop out the mid-range, just to kind of give it that kind of Fender scooped kind of sound. And so we built this prototype and covered it in tweed because we figured, Stevie liked that cool old, that old vintage vibe, put pointer knobs on it, chicken heads on it. And so at that point I was communicating with his guitar tech, whose name escapes me at this point in time. I've tried to remember over the years, and I think his name was Marc. I just don't remember. I mean, like I say, this is all somewhat fuzzy for me. Mm-hmm. But anyway, we got the amp done, and they were already touring. So it was that big giant tour, that he, his last tour basically. And Marc had us send the amp to one of the dates along the way. So we shipped the amp, didn't hear anything. And then all of a sudden we find out Stevie's, dead. And that was just crushing.
Wow.
And so then, and so I was just like, wow, that, I was ruined by that because, like I say, I really thought the guy was amazing. Yeah, and he was, absolutely, again, a super, super nice guy, very respectful. And so nothing happened for a long time. And then I got a phone call about, I don't know, must have been 3 or 4 months after his passing. And it was the guitar tech. And he's like, hey, he says, we've got this amp here. Stevie's not going to need it where he is now. Do you want it back? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Send it back. And so I still have that amp in my collection. It sits here in my shop and it's really awesome.
Oh, that's great.
And what's that?
You still have it. That's great.
I still have it. Oh yeah. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah,
I play it about once every, so many months, but it's really more just kind of more of a memento to me now than
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Did he ever actually play?
Well, and so that was the $1 million question. So right. What I had heard, again, either through the tech or somebody that I had talked to after that phone call, somebody said that he actually had tried it out and that he liked it. but how he liked it, I don't know. There is a picture of him somewhere that shows him and Clapton and is it just him and Clapton? Anyway, there is a photo somewhere, and the amp is behind them, but I don't know if it was Clapton that was playing it or Stevie that was playing it, because it's not a live shot of them playing. It's like they're hanging out. So it's on a stage, it's on a speaker cabinet, but I didn't see any of Eric's SLOs there, so I'm guessing that maybe Clapton was playing through it at that time, but I don't know for sure. Somebody did tell me, though, that he liked it, so I'm going to go with that because it makes me feel good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and let's just say that amp is probably worth a small fortune.
Yeah, I guess it would be. To me, it's kind of priceless, though, so it's really not for sale, but it is
priceless. It is priceless. Yeah.
But to me, it's priceless. I mean, it's, hey, I don't know. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And it's got a big dent in the front of it, so they must have, banged it into something. And
that's great. That's a great amp to have.
Yeah.
Don't let that go.
Don't let that go. Exactly.
It's got a sweet spot.
I'm sure there is a price for every amp, though. But
well, I guess there is. That's what I have a car buddy of mine who wheels and deals in rare and exotic speed equipment, and he tells me, "Hey, Mike," he says, "even though some of this stuff seems unobtainium, there's always a price tag." It's just how much
there is always a price tag. It just depends on what that price tag is.
That's exactly right. That's right.
Yeah, unfortunately there is, but at some point, I'll give you $1 million for it.
Okay, sold.
Done.
Do I get visiting rights?
Actually, after the $1 million, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe not.
Cash.
Yeah, cash, of course.
Cash.
Right. Well, it has
$1 million in cash. Like. Yeah, what does $1 million in cash look like?
What that look? How much?
And will you then go out with $1 million and buy a safe?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
just keep the cash in the safe, and
well, hey, here's $1 million. No pun intended. $1 million question.
Never.
Do they still make $1,000 bills?
I have no idea. I've never seen a $1,000 bill.
Well, the reason I ask is because I don't know if they do anymore. But when I was in 6th grade, we went on a field trip to a big bank here in Seattle. Our 6th grade, we got to see what banking was all about, right? Mm-hmm. And we got to open savings. It was Washington Mutual, in fact. And we got to open savings accounts and do all that kind of fun stuff. And in the field trip, we were shown a 1,000. So they did used to exist. I don't know if they have them anymore, but we were shown a $1,000 bill. It was pretty awesome.
Does anyone out there know if a $1,000 bill still exists?
Yeah.
If so, chime in.
I've seen bills of giant denominations, but I've never actually seen them in, like in real life, but I've seen them in print, or, like there might even be a higher bill than $1,000. I think there might be.
I don't know. I'm just curious because.
Yeah, it's cool. We got a question here from Ed Bauer, and he wants to know, back in the early 90s, he said he used to own a Soldano mod. He thinks it was called the Quick Mod.
Oh, Hot Mod.
A Hot Mod. Okay. He said it was a plug-in 12AX7 tube that had some circuitry with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I
remember that.
He wanted you to just talk about that product and then also and then go into your Jet City connection as well. Okay.
So the Hot Mod was originally designed by Bill Sunt, my again buddy in tech for many, many years. And what it was is Bill and I had worked together briefly at Stars Guitars in San Francisco, and this was kind of during my learning how to design amps. Yeah, it was called Stars Guitars. It was up on Folsom Avenue
in Detroit. Yes. There was Guitars for Stars.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this was called Stars Guitars, and what they were mostly known for is they made really nice brass hardware back in the day. So this would be in the 70s. And very early 80s. They made brass bridges, brass pickup rings, cool knurled brass chrome plated knobs, really very high-end hardware. And I used to use their hardware when I was building guitars. And that's how I got to know the company. I would, mail order it, and they made these really nice things. And so during that period that I was still more focused on building guitars and I was still learning about amps, I went to work for Stars because I thought it'd be really cool to be, building guitars for big time players in San Francisco. Well, I got there and the job turned out to be mainly just to like change a lot of strings and do fret jobs all day long kind of gig. It wasn't what I really expected. I think I had bigger visions of what could happen. But anyway, what the good thing is, during that time I met Bill Sunt, because Bill was working there in the evenings as a machinist making those brass bridges and all the little parts and stuff that they made. And we both realized that we liked tinkering with amps, and so we became fast friends and started, comparing notes. So when Stars went out of business, I moved back to Seattle. I was only there for, I think, less than a year. And Bill moved back to New Mexico, but we stayed in touch. And one of the things we had discussed while we were there, because I had just started modding Marshalls at that time, one thing we had discussed was, wouldn't it be cool if we could come up with a mod that you could just do to a vintage Marshall, but it would be not permanent. You didn't have to drill any holes in the chassis. You didn't have to butcher up the amp. You could just either somehow solder it onto the circuit board, or as Bill, evolved it to be, make it a plug-in. So he designed, it was really pretty brilliant. He took, he kind of studied, the gain circuit I was working on and that I was using in the mods. And he took a 6C10 tube, which is actually a triple triode. 12AX7 is a dual triode. So this had an extra stage in it, all in one tube. Had a big base that I think had 11 pins or something like that. If I'm not mistaken, I can't remember for sure. Anyway, and so he designed this little module that would introduce that extra gain stage just before the the cathode follower tone driver in a Marshall. So it basically replaced V2 of the Marshall. So it still had two of the triode sections served as V2, but then it introduced this third thing as an extra gain stage. And so you could pull out V2, plug this in its place, and what it would do is, since that was a cathode follower, there was one pin of that tube socket was the B plus supply, because on the plate of the cathode follower, you don't have a cathode resistor, or excuse me, the plate, you don't have a plate resistor. And so you have a wide open B plus supply. So you can use that power to run the other two sections of the 12AX7 in the module. And then the only other thing you need is a ground. And so he had a clever little spring-loaded copper contact on this base that when you pushed it into the tube socket on the Marshall, it would obtain a ground by grounding through the tube shield of the tube socket in the Marshall. So it was really cool, because you could literally take a vintage amp, plug this thing in, didn't alter the amp at all. You could unplug it, put the 12AX7 back in, and the amp was totally stock again. So it was a great way to preserve old Plexi Marshalls. There was one downside, and that is because the fact that those Plexi Marshalls had no master volume, the minute you plugged in this hot mod, the amp was on full volume the minute you even cracked the volume control. So it was completely uncontrollable. Now, in the JMPs, it worked really well because you had a master volume. So it was really better suited for like a mid-70s JMP master volume Marshall. Right. But anyway, that's what it was. It was this plug-in replacement deal. And we built a number of those. We started out building them in our own shop. They turned out to be pretty tedious because the little circuit board was just the diameter of a tube base, and they were kind of a pain to make. So we got this guy who's, I think his name was David Hicks, and he was in Oklahoma or somewhere. But anyway, we contracted out the manufacturing to him. And so we built these things and we sold a handful of them. They tended to be a little bit, we had reliability issues with them because of that grounding contact. Sometimes on a Marshall, the rivets would work loose on the tube socket, so those tube bases wouldn't make a good ground contact. So we were having some a few reliability issues, and then the other problem we were having was that people were sticking them in amps that weren't designed for that. In other words, the tube only worked if it was in a socket that was already wired to have that cathode follower and that particular final gain stage, and it had to be the right pin out, because there were some amps that would have a tube like a Marshall had there, but the pin out would be turned around 180 degrees, so it'd be the other half of the 12AX7 was the first one, and then the other half was the second one. And so we were having a lot of guys that, oh, I bought this thing and it doesn't even work at all. Well, you put it in the wrong amp or you put it in the wrong socket. So, we tried to explain what it would work in. Like, it would work in early Basemans, it would work in various amps, but so many people weren't paying attention to the instructions that it got to be a real headache. So we just quit selling it. It just got to be more trouble than it was worth. But it was an interesting product.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting.
Somebody's making clones of those nowadays and selling them on eBay, and I don't know what the quality of those is like. However, and I don't know if I can say this here now, so I'm not going to say who's making it yet, because it's not. I don't think it's available yet. But I know somebody who is taking that and improving upon it, and there's going to be a new version of it that's going to come out sometime in the near future, that instead of using the 6C10 tube, it's going to use two 12AX7s, and it's going to be physically a little larger, and it's going to have some extra features that the original one didn't have. And from what I've seen so far on it, it looks like it's going to be a really good product, and I think it's going to solve a lot of the problems that the early version that we had. So it's going to eliminate those problems, come out. It's going to be a better product. So I've been in contact with the people working on that just to clarify some circuit questions they had, and I gave them the blessing to go ahead with it. And so they'll be offering it as their own product, and it should be pretty good.
Very cool.
And now the Jet City thing. So the Jet City deal, that was something I did a while ago that I don't do anymore. Because I really don't have time to be doing two different companies. I mean, I found that once I was doing Jet City, I was being spread too thin between it and Soldano. So I just chose to keep Soldano going. But the way that came about was, oh God, I can't remember what year it was, but fairly early in the 2000s. It must have been around 2004 or 5, somewhere in there. I got approached by a group of guys that were working at the time for Gibson, and Gibson was interested in getting into making guitar amps, and these guys came to me, and they had already been working on an Epiphone amp that was called the SoCal 50, which was a really a nice little amp, and it was designed by a guy named Peter Belov, and a very good designer, I think. But they needed somebody that could figure out how to do the manufacturing of it, to take this prototype and make it into a mass manufacturable product. And so somehow they had, heard about me, and at the time Gibson had their office right down here in downtown Seattle. So they probably chose me partially just because I was close by. But they came and talked to me and asked me to do some engineering work for them. So I ended up taking their prototype, and I laid out a circuit board for it and kind of worked on some of the mechanical chassis stuff and this and that, just to make it a really easy to build and manufacturable product. And so I worked with Peter, and there were two other guys in the group. So Peter was one of them. The other two guys were Doug White and Kevin, whose last name is escaping me right now. Sorry about that. Memory's bad. Anyway, and so I worked with them, and it was fun, and we had a good time, and we got that amp off the ground, and they got it in production, and I think they sold a fair number of them. And then we also were then going to do a Gibson amp that I was going to build as a custom boutique-y thing, and that just never got off the ground. The president of Gibson seems to be sort of a kind of next shiny object kind of guy. So it's like seemed like a good idea, and then all of a sudden he's off onto something else. Which I never met him, but it anyway, the project kind of just fell apart, and everybody went their separate ways. But Doug had kept in touch with me. So later, I don't know if Peter moved with him, but Doug and Kevin moved. God, I hope I'm embarrassed when I can't remember people's names, but that is one of my faults. I can't remember names very well. Anyway, they moved on to Loud Technologies, which at the time, which is also located just out of Seattle here in Woodinville. And it basically is the big umbrella that has Ampeg, Alvarez, Crate, bunch of other brands who I can't remember right now. Big company. And so they were in the Crate division. So they were now working with Crate. So they came to me about helping them design an amp, a new Crate amp, some cool high gain 3-channel tube thing. And so I worked with them on that. It never went anywhere, but at that time, I guess Doug was getting burned out on the corporate world. So he decided he wanted to take off and become, start his own amp brand. And so he got together with one of the sales guys out there, Dan Gallagher. And so Dan and Doug approached me and asked me if I wanted to be the designer. So I was like, yeah, it sounds like a cool idea, build something that at a lower price point than I could ever achieve here, because the way I manufacture stuff compared to the way they were planning on manufacturing stuff, I could never make an amp that inexpensive. So it sounded like a good idea. It seemed like a way to get my designs into a niche that I never was able to be in before. Mm-hmm. So we all teamed up, and so that's why the original Jet City thing was 333. That signified 3 partners. So we were all 1/3 of Jet City. Yeah, so it was Doug, myself, and Dan. And so, we did that for a while, and I think I designed some really nice products for them. They were, made in Asia, but the quality was good because I set some boundaries. Like, you can't make this thing the cheapest possible. I won't allow that. You've got to upgrade it a little bit and use better parts, better, thicker steel on the chassis, better resistors, this and that. So for an Asian made amp, I think they were really pretty well made, but
they totally
they're still Asian made though. So, I mean, the transformers were always a little bit sketchy, but I thought for the value, you couldn't get more bang for your buck. I mean, they were pretty cool.
No, absolutely not. And then I came in and started modding the 20 watts.
Yeah, and you did a great job. You made them sound great.
And then they were like, and then Doug was selling those for a while on the site.
Yeah.
Done already. I probably did dozens of those.
Yes, I believe so.
But it's a bang for the buck. You can get a JCA 20 at the time. The JCA 20, not the 22, which was the later one, but
right.
The JCA 20, which is kind of like the architecture of an 800, sort of.
Yeah, basically,
different parts, but the architecture. And then you could hot rod that totally, and you get, you could buy a used one for, you could buy a new one for like $300. You could buy a new one
for under $300, yeah.
And you could buy a used one for like $200.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can pay me $300 to modify it, and you have a $500 amp that is a little ass kicker, totally screams.
Totally screams, yeah.
And it wasn't like the original wasn't, but it wasn't as high gain as what I did.
Oh no, it was kind of more of a mid-gain thing. It was a crunchy amp, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It just takes the same architecture and kind of put my little flavor in there, and it was totally cool. It didn't have a loop or anything.
Oh, it didn't have a loop.
No, it didn't have a loop, and the thing is like when I modified them, people would ask, well, can you put a loop in? I go, well, okay, so you have a $200 amp. How much money do you want to put into it?
Right, that's right.
So if you have me modded, it's $300. If you want this other little switch I did, it was another $50. Fine. But when you start getting into loop, then there's another $200.
Right.
So then you're talking about $550 full out everything. you know, you're still modding a $200 amp. I guess it's still like a $700 amp. So you know, it's not too bad, but
No, it's probably cheaper than what it would cost you.
You know what? I have to say though, I mean, for a cheap amp, it was a very well made amp.
It was,
and you know, it was full of good parts. At least in the 20s, I didn't find any problems with the transformers. They seemed fine.
oh no, they worked okay. I just when I would compare them to some of my, you know, more boutique transformers that I get wound, they just didn't have quite the sonic range. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Power transfers were fine, you know.
And but they were very simply made and very solidly made, and it was fine. I mean, it was basically very similar to how you lay out your other boards in some of your other amps. You know, like your Atomic 16 or something like that.
It's basically an Atomic 16. Yeah.
Yeah, the architecture is basically Atomic 16. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were the pots were, you know, the smaller ones, and they were a little cheaper than the full size CTS pots.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
But so, it's good.
Yeah,
it's fine. It's fine.
So, Mike, are you still modding the Jet City amps? Will you still mod them?
Oh, if somebody sent one in, I'd be happy to mod one, but I haven't really had much request for those lately. No. But I'll do it. I mean, if somebody wanted to send one in, I could, you know, do whatever they want to it, or Dave probably could, right? You still do those, Dave?
Every so often someone sends me one and I do it still. Yeah, sure. Yeah. But you know, I just do the 20s, or now whatever they have now, the slightly newer version of the 20 architecture. Because the 22 was more like the SLO architecture, and then you're dealing with an SLO channel and then another channel, and it's just a little harder to get both sounds in.
Right.
Thing. So.
No, I agree. Yeah, there's less to modify on the 22. There's less there.
The nice thing about that one is you just take the whole board out, and you just have a board sitting on your bench, and you're just modding it. It's so easy compared to working on a Marshall or something, you know. And that's why it costs less to mod it than it does a Marshall. It's just easier to do. You just take the whole damn board out, flop it on your bench, and just
it's so much easier.
Change all the parts out and pop the board back in, and there you go. Yeah,
it takes minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I always try to design my stuff to be as serviceable as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Question from Stan Adams.
Okay.
How about some info on your pedals, Mike?
Well, I'm not a big pedal manufacturer. I only really make one pedal, and that is my Supercharger Gto pedal. So the Supercharger is an all-tube overdrive pedal. So it's basically, it's the preamp of an SLO 100 put into a pedal, and it doesn't. So what it is, it's the exact preamp gain stages of an SLO, but instead of having a full tone stack, it just has a tone knob, just one knob. And so you can basically take this thing, plug it into the front end of a Fender Twin or any other really clean amp. And if you use the EQ in the amp as your tone stack, and then just use the tone knob on the Supercharger just to kind of, you know, dial in the overall voicing of that amp, you can replicate the sound of an SLO with a $500 pedal. And it's all, cool. And it truly is all tube. It's like, you know, back in the, I don't know when it was, it must have been like the mid 2000s, you know, everybody and their brother had a tube overdrive pedal, but a lot of those pedals, the tube was just a token tube. They'd put it in there, they'd put enough voltage on it to get the heater to glow, and it was basically a glorified pilot light. And then it was just a slew of solid state stuff doing all the tone shaping. This pedal, my pedal, is a true all tube path all the way from the input jack to the output jack. There's no transistors in there, and I'm running the plates at real amp voltages, and so I bring in a low voltage and I crank it up with a power transformer inside the pedal, and the tubes are running, you know, like at a nominal 300 volts on the plates, which is, you know, where a 12AX7 really needs to be to really work well. So yeah, it's just a really nice, solid, all-tube overdrive pedal.
That sounds great.
Yeah, I remember it. So you just reissued another run of them, right?
Yeah. So so the original ones that I did back quite a few years ago, and again, I'm guessing this must have been early 2000s.
Yeah.
Those actually were, they actually plugged into the wall. They had an AC power cord and they had a power transformer on board. And the problem, well, yeah, it was a problem. The problem I had with those is, in order to be a safe product to market, I had to ground the power supply, of course, because I had no idea what anybody was going to plug these things into.
Right.
But as anybody that's
ground loop.
Yeah, anybody that's fiddled with this stuff long enough knows that anytime you plug two things in that have grounded AC cords, you're more likely to have a ground loop than not have a ground loop. So you're going to get noise. And because of liability issues, I could never print in the instructions that to encourage people to lift the ground, because if somebody already had an amp that didn't have a ground and then they lifted the ground on the supercharger and had no ground, and then by some freak accident they got electrocuted, I could be incredibly liable. So the early pedals suffered a little bit of bad press because of the fact that people thought they were noisy, where all you had to do is lift the ground and they were actually very quiet. And the other problem they had is they were extremely expensive to manufacture, because me being the car guy that I am, I thought it'd be really cool to have half-inch thick machined billet aluminum side panels with CNC, letters milled into the side of them, because I thought it would really look cool, right?
Well,
those side panels, and they did look cool, except that the side panels actually cost more to manufacture, just the two panels, than the whole rest of the pedal. So the price to manufacture that was very high, and people aren't going to spend $1,000 on a pedal just because I wanted to put cool machined aluminum sides on it. And then the other complaint I got was, because it had those half-inch thick aluminum sides on the side of it, the thing weighed over 10 pounds, I think. And so it was ridiculously heavy, which I thought was cool, because that meant when you put it on the floor, it wasn't going to move around. So I thought that was a plus asset. It was the weight. But talking to guys, you put it on pedal board, not an asset at all. People hated it.
Now my pedal board weighs as much as my amp.
Exactly. And so what happened is I took it off the market after a while, just because I felt like it had run its course, and that it had these issues that people seemed to complain about. But then sometime later, I kind of revisited it, and I thought, the pedal itself was inherently cool. It just had these couple of issues. So I solved the noise problem by using a wall wart. So 12 volts AC in, and then I jacked the voltage inside the pedal from the 12 volts rather than the AC line voltage. And the advantage of doing that is wall warts are by design isolated from the ground. And so this solved that noise problem right off the bat. Boom, noise went away, totally quiet. The other thing it enabled me to do is it made it easier for me to build one pedal that could be sold both in the US and in Europe, because instead of having to have two different versions with different power transformers, I could build the same pedal, and all they would need is a wall wart that was appropriate for their country's voltage. As long as it had 12 volts out, 1.5 amps, it would run the pedal. So that was the one change. And then the other thing I did to save weight and to save cost is, instead of having the big heavy aluminum side panels, I made a one-piece wrap around, like clamshell, more like a clamshell design chassis that had 1/8-inch aluminum, which saved a ton of weight, was way less expensive to manufacture. And so I was able to reissue the pedal in a way that had all of the tone quality and all the character of the original pedal, but that didn't weigh 100 pounds. It was physically a little bit smaller, and it weighed a ton less, and it didn't have the grounding issues. And so I did a batch last year, and then I did a batch this year that I have a few left of, and whether I do another batch after this, I don't know. I tend to just to do things and move on. So
there you go, guys. So he has a few left. So
there's a few left. So if you want one, you better buy it, because I don't know when the next batch is going to happen.
They sound great. So
yeah, it does sound great.
I remember the old ones.
Thank you.
Really
well.
Yeah,
the old ones. They were awesome. But like I say, they had
really
that.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you, Dave. Thank you.
They were cool. And now you can take that. You could take that even further. And now there's high voltage switching supplies that you can do. So you don't even have to use a transformer. So you can go DC in.
Right, and I need to learn more about those things, so I
and
haven't
you
really
can do
studied
this.
those things.
Yeah. So, well, maybe in the future here.
Yeah, there might be a new version, right?
Yeah, maybe. Who knows?
Wink, wink, nod, nod.
So I know there was another question that came in, and I want to cover. There's so many questions, Mike, and I want to ask you right off the bat. How are you doing on time?
I'm fine, and actually, as it turns out, the CD release party I thought I was going to tonight is actually next Friday. So if we want to run a few minutes over, we're good.
All right, cool. Good deal. Good deal.
As long as you guys are game, guys, it must be really late where you are, Mark.
It's 11 o'clock. I'm good.
Oh, okay.
Meanwhile, we've watched Mark try to fall asleep before here. He's like, I gotta go, guys.
I'm like, it's 1:30 in the morning. I'm ready to go. But we've got 275 viewers right now.
Wow,
which is awesome.
Is that the most ever?
No, we've hit 300 before, but this is pretty close. It's pretty close.
Come on, guys! Like, get your friends on, and let's
get your friends on here. Come on,
get your friends on here, and let's hit 300. Come on, we can do it.
Come on.
Let's hit it. Let's hit it. So, can you talk about the Hot Rod series of amps as well, and how that started?
Yes. Okay, yeah, that's actually an interesting story. So the Hot Rod series started with the Hot Rod 50. And then later I added a 50 plus, a 100 plus. And the way that started was right after the SLO started gaining its popularity, and I had my little shop there in Hollywood. At the same time that I'm manufacturing SLOs, I was getting a lot of calls for Marshall mods. So I had a mod that I did, and still do, and if people still want it, to JMP Marshalls mainly. I can do it to a plexi, but it means adding a master volume, which is no big deal, of course, because there's 2 holes already in the chassis, so I can just use the existing holes. Anyway, but the popular mod was to the JMPs. So, and the mod is basically real simple. I drill an extra tube socket into the chassis. I add an extra 12x7, and then I build the whole preamp to be the same as the overdrive preamp of an SLO. So it's that circuitry, and because the Marshall power section is already there, and my power section is pretty much identical to a Marshall's, that's all easy. So it's a pretty cool mod, and the amps turn out sounding really good. And I used to do a lot of them when I was in LA. I mean, there'd be times when I'd have 5 Marshalls piled up in the front room while I'm building an SLO, and then looking at the pile of Marshalls like, oh, I got to take a couple days off from amp production so I can go over and work on these amps. And so I was doing a bunch of mods, and this would have been back in the mainly in the Melrose shop, Dave. So this was like, again, pretty early on. Yeah. And so this mod became a pretty popular mod, I guess. The word got around, people would have me do it. But what got weird was I'd get phone calls, and a guy'd call me up like, hey, I want to get one of your Marshall mods. And I'd be, great, bring your amp in. Well, I don't have the amp yet. And I'm like, well, that's weird. He goes, so I'm calling you to ask you which amp should I get to have you mod. And I'm like, well, that seems weird. And so back in those days, you could buy a clean JMP for about $400.
Yeah.
But by the time you bought the amp for $400, brought it to me, and I usually had to retube it because the tubes would be shot. You had another $100 in it, and then I would do the mod. And at the time, I think I was only charging, I think $350 for the mod, but still, you'd be then about $850 into this amp. And if you wanted a loop, that was $150 more. So now you were at $1,000. So I was thinking to myself one day, I was like, it's kind of weird. It's one thing if you've already got the Marshall and you bring it to me, that's one thing. We do the mod. You got this great amp, and you've got this killer tone for a very reasonable price. But it seemed like it was weird if you were going to go out and buy an amp, have me bring it up to speed, and then mod it, because it just didn't seem like, it was still a good value, but I felt like, why don't I just offer an amp that is all, and here's where my little marketing cliche or whatever you want to call it came to be, was why couldn't you just buy an amp that's hot rodded right out of the box? And that was kind of like my thinking. So the first amp was what was called the Super Lead 60, which was very short lived. And and so the way the Super Lead 60 happened is I already had this hot rod idea, except I didn't know how to ramp up to do lower cost, faster manufacturing. And so at the time, I had a distributor in Japan that was importing my SLOs, and he claimed that he had a manufacturer over there that could build me very high quality stuff and get it to a price that could be very affordable. So I designed the Super Lead 60, sent it to Japan, and he was good for his word. He built a very nice amp for a very low price. I was able to import them into the U.S. and still offer them at a pretty reasonable price. I think they were like around $1,100. I think is what they sold for, which wasn't cheap at the time, but it wasn't bad either. And it was about on par with what it would cost to buy a Marshall and have me do all the mods to it. It came with an effects loop, it had the high gain, and it was a brand new amp with a warranty. So it made sense. But after about the first couple batches, it became harder for me to do, because when I would get them, I would do my own QC on them, and generally they were always really pretty good. But then if I had to take any time at all to fix anything that was wrong with them, it really slowed me down, and it was a pain in the ass doing just the process of bringing them into the country. I just didn't like dealing at that time with all the paperwork and import and all this, that, and picking them up at the freight dock and all that. So I began thinking, like, it would be cooler if I could do this same amp but build it. And by this time I'd moved my shop. I wasn't on Melrose anymore. I'd moved out to the valley, and I was out in Van Nuys next to the airport. And so I had more space I had more room where I could work. So then I was like, I think I could manage to do a mass produced product here and still build the SLOs and have enough room to do everything. So I took that same amp, the SL60, I laid out the circuit board to be more labor efficient to assemble, in that the original one still had flying leads going to the pots and to the preamp tube sockets. Yeah. And I decided, well, I'm going to just mount the pots and the tube sockets on the board and save a lot of labor and make a more reliable, durable package. And so I started building that same amp. I renamed it the Hot Rod 50 because I wanted to get back to that whole hot rodded right out of the box idea I had. And so the Hot Rod 50 came out, and basically that was a 50-watt amp that had the SLO's overdrive channel. It had an effects loop, and I think it had a slave out also. Not that anybody ever uses those anymore, but at the time it was a kind of a cool feature because of all the rack rigs people were building. Mm-hmm. So that's how the Hot Rod 50 was born, and it was a hit right out of the gate. Actually, I was very happy with it, because here you could buy a brand new amp for $1,100 that had all the SLO voodoo, it did exactly what the modded Marshalls did, and you didn't have to go hunt down an old Marshall to have me mod. You could just go buy this amp already done. And so then, of course, the question came immediately, hey, can I get one with channel switching? Well, yes, you can. So I then added the Crunch channel, the SLO, to it, and built the Hot Rod 50 Plus. And then from there, I just added 2 more power tubes, and it was the 100 Plus. So the Hot Rod 100 Plus is basically the exact same circuit of an SLO, just built in a more economical manner, and it has 2 less switches. It doesn't have the clean crunch switch or the bright normal switch on the normal channel. Instead, the clean crunch switch is hardwired in the crunch mode, which, by the way, the original SLOs did not have a clean crunch switch either. I didn't think it was really necessary. That was more of an add-on that was inspired by Andy Brower, because he said that a lot of guys found that trying to get a clean sound in that normal channel, which I never designed it to be clean anyway. I was always, designed as a rock amp, but guys do want that flexibility. So the clean crunch, which is simply a pad on that first gain stage, so that the distance between, say, 2 and 3 on the knob gets spread out to, say, all the way up to about 8. You can fine tune that little tiny part of the band to this much, so you can fine tune your clean sound. And so on the hot rods, I figured, well, that would save cost to not have that switch, and you can still get that clean sound. You just have to be a little bit more precision in how you set the knob. So I eliminated that switch. most guys always liked the bright switch on the overdrive channel of the SLO. When I noticed when I'd go to clubs and see guys playing them, I'd notice that's where it was. So I just hardwired the bright switch on and took out those two switches, and that was the hard 50 plus and the 100 plus. And I did a really cool poster for that amp back in when it came out. And again, I had 4 models dressed in the cool purple outfits like mannequins sporting, and they were all huddled around my car. And they, like I described earlier, had the amp heads where the cylinder heads would normally be on the motor. And it was a really cool poster, and I sold a ton of them at NAMM one year, and it was really fun.
So what was it called? What was the 2-channel preamp that you had made also?
Oh, so that came after
that was overseas, right?
No, that was made up in Newbury Park.
Oh, weren't the early ones overseas?
Yes, you're right, Dave. The first ones, the very first probably 100 of those were made at the same place that made the SL60.
Yeah, the silver-faced ones, yeah.
The silver-faced was, exactly. And then once again, it was that import problem I was having where I was like, God, you know, I bet you we could do these here. But again, I didn't want to handle the production. So I redesigned it, made it a little bit more compact. And I had it made out at a contract manufacturing place out in Newbury Park, out there in Simi Valley or somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember the name of the place. I can't remember.
I remember that. What was the preamp called? I can't remember.
Oh, that was called the SP77.
SP77. Yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
And wait, was the original preamp the SP66?
Oh, so the original preamp was the X88R.
No. The Japanese version or whatever.
Oh, it was also called the SP77. That one I didn't change the name on.
I remember those vividly.
Yeah.
I remember the clean channel. I remember the clean channel on the purple ones that you had made had a little bit of coupling hum from the transformer or something. I remember that in the
there
time.
Was,
yeah, that coupled into the clean channel a little bit. I just
yeah, no, yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, because the leads were, I think like the master volume leads were going too close to the transformer.
Yeah, old memories from a guy building racks at the time.
yeah, right. Yeah, you were probably like, cussing.
God damn it!
Yeah, you were cursing me, weren't you? You were like, that damn Soldano, he doesn't know what he's doing.
No, I wasn't saying that. But those sounded cool.
Yeah, and they were a good bang for the buck. I think they were. I can't remember the price now, but they were
cheap.
They were really reasonable.
What was an X88 originally? Was that a couple grand or something?
Yeah, you know, I think it was around 1700.
1700? Yeah.
16 or 1700. Yeah.
What was the original price of the SLO?
Yeah, I think it was like $16.95.
Oh, shit.
The dollar went a little further back in those days.
Yes, of course, inflation.
Yeah,
absolutely. Wow.
Hey, we got a question from Tony Choi. Just wrote me. He says, "Can you please ask Mike about the Yamaha T100C combo amp?"
Yes. I designed that. So that's an interesting story as well. Okay. Oh, and I want to back up way back to the beginning of the show. You know, we were talking about the earliest SLOs I sold. I forgot my arrival in LA story, and that is the first SLO sale I made aside from my friend Tommy up here in Seattle was serial number 2 belongs to Howard Lease of Hart. And I met him.
Does he still have it?
He still has it. And the way I sold that to him, I had just arrived in LA. I hadn't even settled down yet. I was like just, camping at my second cousin's house. And so I went out and had pizza one night with these guys I met down there. And like I said, I'd only been in town about 2 or 3 days. And they wanted to take me to the Rainbow to have pizza because the Rainbow is world famous on Sunset Strip, and I'd never been there. I'd heard about it. I read about it in Cream magazine and stuff, right? But I didn't know about the Rainbow. So they go, let's go to the Rainbow. So we went to the Rainbow, and we went early before it got really crowded. And we were sitting at our table, and Howard Lease walks in and plops himself down in this big giant booth. And so, my buddies are like, "Hey, that's Howard Lease over there," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's him." And they go, "Well, go talk to him." I go, I can't go talk to him. It's Howard Lease. And they basically shoved me out of the booth. Like, go talk to him. Tell him about your amp, So these buddies of mine shoved me out of the booth. And I'm like, hello, Mr. Lease. My name is Mike Soldano. I'm from Seattle. And well, I really, I think you play really nice stuff in Hart, and I make guitar amps, by the way. And he's like, he was totally gracious. He's like, and I said, because I think I said, I don't want to bother you because I know you're busy. He goes, hey, he said, my friends haven't shown up yet. I'm the only one in this booth. Sit down and talk to me. So I sat down and I told him about, the SLO, and I said I had this amp, and he says, well, I'd like to hear that. He says, we happen to be recording at Rumbo Recorders up in Canoga Park. Can you bring one up tomorrow morning? And I'm like, okay, cool. Wow. I'll do it. So the next morning I drove up there. And this is my personal one. So this is the second one I built, the one I was planning on keeping, and it was red. And I took it in, and he plugged in, played about 3 notes, and was like, I got to have this, but I don't have my checkbook with me. Just hang tough. I'll be right back. He runs out the parking lot, jumps in his red Porsche, heads off to Malibu. And meanwhile, I'm just kind of hanging out like in this big, giant, fancy state-of-the-art studio. And while I'm waiting for him to come back, I get to meet Ann and Nancy Wilson, which is really awesome. And awesome. I was invited to have ribs with them for lunch. They went out and got barbecue. So it was really a fun experience for my first, I don't think I'd been in LA more than 3 days or something. And I was like, this place is pretty cool. I think I can get used to this, And so he came back, pulled out his checkbook, wrote me a check for I think it was either $16 or $17.95, but he bought. So he was actually, aside from my friend Tommy here in Seattle, who bought number 1, Howard was the first LA amp sale, and then Lukather after him. So anyway, I didn't mean to digress there. So let's get back to the question at hand, which was the Yamaha. So at the time, this was pure luck almost. Well, maybe it was almost pure luck. The way I got involved with the Yamaha thing was Yamaha of America was located in Buena Park down in Orange County. And they had a guy there named Paul Meisenthal that was kind of like their lead product development guy. And he was doing some really cool stuff with their guitar line at the time. He was probably the main motivating force behind Yamaha opening their custom shop up on Weddington Ave right next to Andy Brower's. So he was really trying to bring Yamaha back into popularity because, Yamaha has always made good, solid products, but for guitar players, they were, with the exception of that guitar that Carlos Santana made famous, they were kind of a non-starter company when it came to guitar stuff. Their amps were kind of mediocre at best. They were good solid state amps, but nobody wanted solid state stuff at that era. And so he was really hell bent on getting Yamaha out there and in front of people. So he had been working with some other designers, and I don't even know who they are to this day, but I had an appointment at Mates. Isn't Mates the place that used to be next to Andy Brower's, Dave?
Well,
no, not Mates. Mates.
No, Leeds. Leeds was next.
Leeds. It was Leeds, not Mates. I'm sorry. Mates is the one.
Best rehearsal studio you guys ever.
What's that?
The best rehearsal studio ever was Leeds.
Was it Leeds? Okay, well that's where they were because it was right next to Andy.
Yep.
So right at that time was when Mark Youngersmith got the gig with Billy Idol. So he was basically auditioning new gear. And so he had called me up and like, hey, I want to try out that SLO because I remember when Charlie was playing it, I really liked it, but I want to play one for myself. So I got up to Leeds, and as I got there, I heard Mark in the room shredding through some kind of amp, right? And I'm like, oh, I guess I'm just another guy in a cattle call, whatever. And so I wait outside, and he stops playing, the noise goes down, and then all these guys in suits are leaving the room, right? And eventually, one of them walks out, and he's got this amp in hand, which I don't really remember what it was, and they leave. And then I come back in, and I hook Mark up to the SLO. He starts shredding, he's cranking it up, and apparently these guys were still outside in the hallway listening. Well, it turns out these were the cats from Yamaha, and they were having Mark check out one of their latest prototypes. And so what I didn't know at the time is they were listening to him playing the SLO. So at that time I had a guy named Ed Simeone, who was the importer of TC Electronics stuff. He was also a partner in a rehearsal place out in the valley called the Power Station.
Yeah, I remember that.
He was also involved with Charlie Sexton, Michael McDonald. I mean, he was really well established in the scene, and so I'd gotten to know him because he had taken an interest in what I was doing, and he was kind of helping me out with some business advice. In fact, at one point I was using space in his shop to build stuff because my place in Hollywood was getting kind of crowded, and so we had some ideas. We were toying things together. Well, I get a call from Ed, and he says, man, he says, Mike, he says, I just got a call from Paul Meisenthal at Yamaha, and apparently they heard that amp you brought up for Marc, and they're interested in talking to you about designing them an amp. So I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. So Ed he was kind of my business associate in this whole deal because he arranged all the meetings, but he got us a meeting with Yamaha. We went down and talked to them, very corporate kind of stuff, right? Which was way out of my wheelhouse. I was not used to dealing with any of that. So I was really happy to have Ed along, and he did a lot to help negotiate a really good deal for me. But basically, Yamaha contracted me to design an amp for them that they, quote unquote, they wanted a boogie killer. So I basically, once again, turned to my tried and true SLO overdrive channel, put that in conjunction with a kind of mid-gain clean channel, not as crunchy as the Soldano's normal channel, added reverb to it, and I built this pretty nice little 50-watt prototype combo. They signed off on it. They loved it. And so then the T-Series Yamahas were born, and basically they had a T50 and a T100 combo, and then a T50 and T100 head. The heads were just rack-mountable versions of the combo's chassis, basically. And the first ones were a really good product. I thought they were pretty cool, but later Yamaha started fiddling with the design for reasons that are still unknown to me. And so the later ones weren't quite as cool. They kind of messed up the reverb and stuff, but for a very short little window of time, people were able to buy a very cool amp for a very reasonable price. And they're still a killer bargain. I mean, you can buy a used one for a very good price, and they deliver. I mean, those early ones deliver, and you can always modify the later ones to sound like the early ones. Just got to tweak the reverb a little bit, but they're pretty cool.
Right. That's cool. Now, there's another question that's come up several times, so I won't credit it to any one person, but it's been said, and Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been said that the PV5150 is a kind of a clone of the SLO. So I'm curious of your thoughts on that.
Hold on a minute.
Yeah.
Let's start before that.
Okay.
Let's start. Oh, I think it was before that. Let's start with the rectifier.
Yes, let's.
Okay, there we go. The rectifier for almost.
I have to bite my tongue here.
The early rectifier.
No, don't bite your tongue.
For all intents and purposes, the preamp section of the amp is maybe, other than maybe slight few parts that aren't really making much of a difference, is an SLO.
That is correct.
I mean, like, exactly. In fact, the question was brought up the other day about doing a rectifier synergy module. And I said, hold on a minute.
We already have one.
You have it already. It's the Soldano module. And just to make sure I wasn't thinking wrong, I actually looked at the schematic online, and I'm like going, no, really, God damn it, it's the same exact preamp. I mean, exactly the same. What is different about a rectifier is the power section of the amp.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a much weaker, crappier ass power section. It's not even 100 watts, really.
No, it's not. The output transformer is tiny.
Yeah, it's tiny, and it doesn't have the oomph that the SLO has. So that's what sets the rectifier apart from that. So those bastards basically just stole it.
Yeah. And you know, and when that happened, it totally broke my heart because I had really high respect for Randall Smith up until that moment. And then at that point I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. You know,
I mean, it literally is. If you compare the schematics, you can do it online, guys. If you can read a schematic, you can do it online. Look at the two schematics, and other than one or two little tiny parts that are just kind of filtering stuff a little bit, it's the same damn thing.
It is.
So, and that was
very
awful.
sad. It's very sad.
That was awful, considering the kind of sales that Boogie had on that product.
Oh yeah,
generation of people using that product from a stolen design.
Yeah.
You know,
thank you.
And look, I'm not saying that all our stuff didn't come from somewhere.
Oh, of course it did.
Because all our stuff came from Marshalls and Basemans and the RCA tube manual and variations of Marshalls and tweaks. But there's very telltale parts of our circuits that are easily you can easily look at and go, oh, that is the Soldano circuit.
Yeah.
And the 39K cathode resistor.
Bingo.
Sorry, no one else in history, I think, used the 39K cathode
That's right.
resistor.
And 1.8K.
You see that? It's that. And there's a few things that I do that are telltale signs. And if I see it somewhere else, it's like, well, I know where they got that from, you know?
Yeah, we put our thumbprint on it. That's right. As designers, we put our little thumbprint there.
Yeah. And I'm not saying no, by no stretch of the imagination did any of us necessarily reinvent the wheel.
No, I didn't.
We just hot rodded the wheel.
We hot rodded the wheel,
basically. You know, the wheel's still the same, but it's just a different take on the different flavor of wheel. So to speak.
But to take the exact schematic, basically, and
it's exactly
exact.
Now,
it is.
Yeah.
Now, to address the PV thing, it's not exactly it. Some stuff was taken from it, but not exactly.
No, you're right.
Rectifier is just a blatant ripoff.
Yeah.
So.
Wow.
There's the clarification that I just said.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dave. I enjoyed hearing it from you because that way it doesn't sound so egocentric if I would have said it. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that sucks. I mean, the amount of success that happened with them too, with that circuit, it was just like, oh Jesus.
Yeah.
You know, it's like through the 90s. Gee, I mean, you know, that was the it amp to have, you know.
Yeah,
and into the 2000s, you know.
Right.
And, I forgot when it came out exactly. It must have been 90 something. 90.
Yeah, it was some. Yeah.
Oh no, I kind of remember. I think I was still at Making Music at the time, so that must have been early 90s.
Oh, might have been. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it was.
I didn't see one right away. I saw one after they'd been out about a year, and one came through my shop, and when I opened it up, like say, my heart literally sank. I was just like, really? Seriously, you know?
But in reality, even though it's the same circuit, it really doesn't sound like a.
No, it doesn't. Well, the power section, like say, it's just
yeah, it doesn't sound like that at all. So
yeah,
doesn't have the
dynamics. Yeah, it doesn't have the dynamics that my stuff has. But it was saddening to me. I felt, I don't know, I felt sort of like, I don't know, I wasn't happy about it. Not so much because just
it's just not cool. It's not cool.
Yeah, it's just
not cool. Not cool.
At least change it. At least change it.
Yeah, change something to make it. Yeah,
change it more. Have it. You could have the same thing, but at least change it some more. I mean, don't put the 39K in.
Yeah, that's right. Don't put the 1.8K,
7K in or something. Just like
exactly.
Don't use 1.8K. Use 1.5K.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds the same. It wouldn't make any difference. Just change the thing so it's not so apparent. So blatant.
Do something.
Now the PV. Correct me if I'm wrong. The PV 5150 had an extra gain stage in it, right? had an extra tube stage.
Yeah, it does. In fact, I'd have to go looking.
I've never had one apart, so I'm not sure. I don't know the PV circuit.
I just remember when
part of me is in there.
Part of you's in there, but not as much as you think.
Yeah, I don't think it's a lot.
Way more gain stages and
it's way more compressed sounding to me.
Way more compressed sounding and I
a bit noisier.
I have to look at the circuit again. It's definitely has an extra gain stage.
Yeah.
From what you have.
Yeah.
By the way, we got a question from Andy Pessia. He asks, he wants to know, and he knows that this might be a touchy subject, but he wants to know from Fractal Effects, would Mike and Dave ever consider selling a patch after tweaking or optimizing all the various settings available? I can almost see every Fractal owner immediately buying a custom tweak profile from Soldano and Friedman.
Fractal already has for us.
That comes
essentially
that comes with it, right?
It comes with it. Essentially the BE 100 profile. It was derived from schematics and actual amps. So I don't really. There's nothing else I would do to it. In fact, the vast majority of people that use the Fractal use the BE or HBE patches that I found out there in the world. Still not the real amp.
No.
It's still not tubes. It's still not analog. It still has. It's pretty damn good, but it's still. I just don't. My thing with modelers is like when I look at them, I just don't. Maybe that's because I'm older, that we're older. When I look at an old Marshall or something that's been beat up and scuffed up and rips in the thing, you just look at it and you go, "Oh man, that's cool." That's a cool old amp, or the old Parks or this or that. Oh god, that's cool looking.
Yeah, and the cool smell that you get off of a hot amp.
The smell of the kind of musty, slightly mildewy smelling old amp smell, and that's what's cool. And now I'm looking at a Kemper or something. It looks like a futuristic toaster.
Yeah.
And, I just can't get behind it because I grew up in an era where what cool was a Marshall stack or high watts or things like that, and for me to look at anything else is just like, it just doesn't work for me. I can't,
Yeah. It still doesn't sound.
I'm the same way. I'm just I just like the tactile response that a real amp gives. And in all honesty, I've never played a Fractal, so I can't really judge it. I'm sure they're pretty cool because I've heard recordings made with them, and I gotta tell you, when you hear a recording, it's hard to tell that it's not a real amp. As far as me doing anything with them, I don't think I can do anything with them because I have licensed the SLO model to Amplitude, and they did a spot on job with it. It sounds incredible, actually. And so Amplitude, which is IK Multimedia, they offer the SLO, and they actually used a real amp, like Dave says, a real amp. They use schematics. They got inside that thing with their, however they do their, crazy
crunching the numbers.
thing.
Yep.
And they did a good job. And when I heard one, when I okayed it when it was done, I was very impressed. But it doesn't feel, no matter how loud you crank it up, it still doesn't feel like a real amp. It doesn't.
Right.
None of these modelers seem to have that that hit you in the gut and then hit the string and feel the guitar vibrating and feeding back. None of them do that. They don't have that.
Well, generally young guitarists today don't understand the feedback thing.
No, they don't. I don't think they get it.
Yeah. This like the interaction between the amp and the cabinet and the feedback and the I find, I could be crazy, but I find that music that I hear today that's supposedly heavy, that's newer bands that's supposedly like heavy, and I find the music doesn't sound aggressive. Okay, yes, maybe the riffs are heavy and the guitar sounds are distorted and everything, but there's no impact or no like really aggressive in your face kind of sound. And
Yeah.
it's
Kinda
kind of
sterile.
puffy sounding and thick and like just kind of not nasty. Like, you know, like if you listen to like a whatever, like let's say Nasty, a Motorhead or something, right?
You're right. Yeah.
So that was like nasty and raw and just in your face. Like
Exactly.
I hate them. That's irregardless, but
Love 'em.
it's nasty and raw and just like just bright and nasty and just you're smacking that guitar and the volume is hitting you and it's like this you know, MC5 or something or you
right,
know,
right,
and stuff like that. It's like just fuck you, I'm gonna kill you, you know, like with this music, you know, that's what's happening, you know, and I often find that it's so lost in rock, current rock that exists that I've heard.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's
maybe there's some
now.
out there. Maybe there's some out there that exist that I don't know about, which it's very possible.
Yeah.
But
no, I agree with you, Dave. It's
just like I want to see someone nasty, sloppy, and mean, and just playing like just snarling at you, and that's cool.
I want to see High on Fire. Yeah, that's what I want to see.
Yeah. So you know, that's my stupid take on it. But there you go.
Yeah. Hey, you guys, I'm going to take a quick pause for the cause, and I will be right back. So talk amongst yourselves, and I'll be back to answer more questions.
No problem. All right. Well, that was Andy Pesia. Thanks for asking that question. And then let me jump back to you know, while we have Mike on break here, let me just jump.
So you know, someone said something here. He goes, yeah, Dave, I hear what you're saying, but my 180 watt tube amps messed up my ears a bit. I'm not necessarily talking about sheer volume. I'm not necessarily talking about that. I'm talking about the basic sounds. That nasty raw sound can be had from little combo amps. You know, the Rolling Stones, although actually the Rolling Stones were nastier and heavier at times than some heavy bands that I hear now. It's a totally different style of music, but there was just everything's too perfect and too dialed in and too pretty and I want people to get back to what, you know, the subversiveness of rock and roll. You know, it's not supposed to be that way. Yeah. Yes, Vincent Moretti, I'm talking about dynamics. You're correct.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole host of things.
There you go. Yeah, except balls to the wall, nasty. Pick scrape, nasty. Yes, I agree. Except balls to the wall is nasty. Yeah, and many other things. And again, I'm not talking necessarily I've heard acoustic music can sound nasty and gnarly. I've heard blues music can sound nasty and attacky and gnarly. I'm not necessarily talking about sheer volume or anything. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the attitude that the guitar is played with more so than anything. And you know, and how it doesn't have to be perfect. The music in the past has been full of imperfections, and I think that's what you like about it. The little sloppiness or the little missed note becomes a hook in the end. It becomes something that you anchor to, that you know it's coming, you know, and that's what's cool about it. So
it is. I mean, there's something about the unpredictability, right? About playing, you know, those types of amps and, you know, the tones that you can get from it. You just don't get that from the modeling amps. You just don't get it.
Someone said Guns N' Roses was really nasty. Yeah, that was a band that was really nasty sounding. Great.
Yeah. Even early Aerosmith, nasty sound.
Oh my God, yeah, like
totally.
Like Toys in the Attic record.
Toys in the Attic rocks, man.
That's a great record.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. A friend of mine that was testing some amps down at the factory yesterday, not my amps, but some other stuff at the factory. When I was there testing my amps, he just played a couple really old Aerosmith riffs, and I was like, oh man, yeah, that was great.
Oh man, I love it. I love Lord of the Thighs. I love that song.
Mm-hmm.
God, I'm thinking maybe that's back in this. What album is that off of?
Oh, this is great. I'm talking about this stuff, and some guy makes a comment. Rocky Star makes a comment. Snowflakes know nothing about raw, unadulterated attitude and balls out aggression. Excellent.
Snowflakes.
Excellent.
That's the hashtag.
You just got, crap, man. I'm from Detroit, so there wasn't any non-aggressive stuff there. It didn't exist.
Yeah, I can't imagine anything
non-aggressive was aggressive. You know what I mean? It was like even R&B was aggressive and raw and nasty. So I'm not just talking heavy music. I'm just talking stuff played with an attitude. And
it's having that edge. It's the edge. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I mean, to me, one of the guys that still is out there doing it plays a Friedman amp. It's Chris Shiflett and Dave Grohl with Foo Fighters. I mean, they're still they're still
doing old school rock and roll, but it's still not. It's still a little polished, but less than what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I agree. They make great, pop rock songs. But even like all that early Van Halen records and stuff are raw.
Oh, totally.
Just raw.
So raw. Yeah, it's just
by the seat of the pants, raw. And when records were made quick, and the bands went in and played it, and there's mistakes in there. Sure.
Yeah,
that's
what makes it good. I love the mistakes. That's what gives it soul.
Cool. Yeah, and that's what just everyone just
makes it human, makes it real.
Dude, you can make a record much faster.
Right. It doesn't take 3 years to make an album. Yeah.
No.
Hey, we got a question from Mike from Black Strat Blues. Does the SLO need a new power transformer to convert from 117 volts to 230 volts, or does it have taps on the primary? He asks.
It needs a new transformer. We use dedicated transformers in the SLO, so you would have to swap transformers to do that.
All right. I'm going to jump back into one of the questions that we had from Facebook. Let me jump back here. And okay, let's talk about George Lynch.
Okay.
There seems to be an ad. I've got someone sent this to me, and they said they want us to discuss it. This is the ad.
Oh my God, that's hilarious! Yes, that was a giveaway we did back in the day.
Oh,
and so what it was really crazy. I can't remember. Gosh, I can't remember who called us, but somebody called us up. It was either somebody at the magazine or it was somebody that was a marketer that was putting this whole thing together. But I guess they had approached George to do a giveaway, and they asked him what all of his favorite stuff was. And and he said, well, Soldano amp, and Eventide processor, this guitar, that, whatever. And so then they called us up and was like, hey, would you be willing to participate in this, this big giveaway? And, if you do it, you'll get some free advertising in the magazine, and you'll have all this exposure, and it's going to reach, 5 million readers or something. So, and the numbers were pretty astounding at like what the outreach would be for this. So the only thing we had to do really was pony up a free amp and throw it in the ad. So we built this thing, and I think that it ran for like 5 months, or maybe that might be too long. It ran for a certain length of time though, and we got a lot of response from that ad. And then at some point, some lucky guy won it, and then all we had to do was just build the amp. They sent us an address of where it had to go to. We built the amp and we shipped it off to them, and it was pretty cool. Some lucky guy got a really cool rig. And during that whole time though, I had still not ever met George Lynch in person. He was still some guy that I was waiting to meet, but I think I might have talked to him on the phone before or something. But it was really a fun little project, and it generated a lot of interest. So yeah, that was
Yeah, I was thinking of something when we were talking to George Lynch again. I think the reason, so he had that newer amp from you, and then he traded it for that older Brower amp,
right.
And then at some point in time, he got the line on his original SLO from way back, which I think was stolen or something.
Yes, originally. There was something like that happened,
and he got the line on it. And he wound up getting that back, and that's why he let the other one go.
Ah, yeah, because I remember that when it got stolen, it was around Christmas time, and I can't remember what year, because I remember I got this really weird message from like some police department, and then I got a call from George, and they were asking me, like verify serial numbers or something like that, and it was right around the Christmas holiday, because I remember I wasn't even really in the shop. I had already maybe started taking time off, but I had just happened to come in and check the phone. So here I am, like on probably, Christmas Eve, talking to some detective in, I can't remember where it was, but they were trying to track down some information on the whole deal. And it was rather cryptic, but yeah, I think he did actually end up getting it back.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what the deal was. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just remember that as we were talking about that.
Yeah, we built a lot of stuff for George over the years, because he was a guy who liked to experiment.
Oh yeah, so still does.
Yeah, so he'd call up often and just go like, "Hey, I'm thinking like, let's build an SLO that has 2 overdrive channels, no crunch channel. Let's just make it a dual overdrive." And we'd like, "Well, okay, sure, why not?" So we'd build that, and then once I think we built him a 1 channel only SLO, where it's just stripped down to nothing but just 1 channel. And so, he was really, and as Dave says, because I haven't talked to George in a while, but I guess he loves experimenting. He's very much a tone seeker.
The funny thing, he kind of always comes back to his old Marshalls that he likes. So it really kind of still always comes back to that in the end. And as much as he's tried other things, it still winds up coming back to the old Marshalls.
Yeah.
So that's
cool.
Just, George is constantly trying something new, but yeah.
Someone wrote, not someone, Dave Bilbrow wrote, or Bill Brow. He said James Hetfield used SLOs for a while, and I didn't realize that either. I thought he was just a Meza guy.
I don't really. Well, I know I've never sold him one directly. I did loan them an SLO for a while, a couple of years ago, with the idea, they were going to try them out and see if that's something they might have wanted to, bring into their gear chain. But I don't remember ever selling him any SLOs. And I've never seen any pictures of him playing an SLO. So as much as I'd probably like him to be playing SLOs, I don't think I think he's pretty much a Mesa guy. I think he's still pretty much selling those.
That's what I thought. So the other question for you was, what's next on the horizon for Soldano?
Wow, that's hard to say. I mean, there's still stuff I want to design and do, and I have to be really frank. The reason I haven't been putting out more new products every year, that as many as I'd like to, is because these days I end up spending so much time running my business that I don't get to do the stuff I really love, which is designing and building stuff. And so I'm slow getting stuff out, but I will tell you that I think there's going to be an SLO Mark II on the very near horizon. The reason being the original SLO design, as much as I love it and have huge nostalgic attachment to it, and it's certainly a good amp, don't get me wrong. I mean, I've built my entire business on that amp, and I'm very proud of it, and I'll never not be proud of it, but it's getting a little long in the tooth. It's a 30-plus-year-old design, and it's getting increasingly hard to manufacture because, as weird as this will sound, I've actually outlived the product life of a lot of the parts that are in that amp. So, for example, the impedance switch, simple little thing like a 3-position rotary switch that we use for the impedance selector, CRL quit making that switch back in the early 90s, and I bought out all the ones that were left on the face of the planet back in 1992, and I've been using that stash of switches all these years, and I just ran out of them last week, and so now I'm having to substitute. And there's plenty of good replacement switches, don't get me wrong, but I'm having to make changes in order to put that switch in the amp. And I'm having that problem with other parts that we use too. There's stuff like
Vactrals.
Vactrals, perfect example. Yeah, Dave, those are getting to be A, inconsistent, but B, very expensive. And they aren't quite the same as the ones we were using back in the day. And so there's just all these little things that keep kind of changing. And like say, a lot of these parts that we used to use have become obsolete because newer technology has replaced them. And then the biggest issue has been the quality of preamp tubes. When I originally designed the SLO, you could actually still buy American-made 12AX7s. Believe it or not, trust me, there was a day when that still happened. And when you did, you could just take any random 5 tubes, stab them in the preamp tube sockets in any given order, take the amp into the test room, fire it up, and it sounded wonderful, and it was quiet. Nowadays, I probably spend anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour on every brand new SLO we build in the test room with a big box of 12AX7s, and I sit there hand picking the tubes that go in the first 2 sockets because I'm trying to find a pair of 12AX7s that don't have a lot of heater hum, because these modern tubes, as much as I'm glad they still make tubes, the quality just isn't the same as they were back when they were still being made in America. Or even when they were made in China in the early 90s, they were still, I think the machinery that makes the tubes is wearing out, and none of these companies that are building these tubes can afford to retool and tighten up the tolerances. So what'll happen is 2 12AX7s exactly in the same socket on the same day, minutes apart. You plug one in, you crank up the gain, and the amp is, I pull out another one out of the box, I plug it in, and it's just whoosh. It's just the shot noise, which you can't get rid of shot noise, but you can certainly get rid of the AC hum. And so I can safely say that nowadays, to have a quiet amp, you have to put DC heaters in them. And again, that wasn't even an issue back in those days. I mean, old Fenders, old Marshalls, High Watts, Oranges, you name them. All amps made prior to probably, well, Dave, you'd know better than me on this because you look at more new stuff, but maybe everything prior to 2010 probably had AC heaters in it. It's only been recently. Well, okay, you have a better feel. You tell me.
Like we were doing DC heaters, like Igniter did DC heaters back in the early 90s.
Oh, really? Oh, cool.
Yeah, and
well,
I remember doing working on a bunch of amps, even with the early 90s Chinese preamp tubes and stuff, and they're still having heater hum issues. So you're right, the old ones don't at all.
The old American ones don't at all. Or the British
ones. So the thing is, so that amp was built when you could get away with AC heaters, and now it's just too much of a pain in the ass retubing one of those because you got to spend so much time selecting tubes. And so I feel that it's just time for a little bit of a technical upgrade. I mean, it's going to still sound just
A
as
remodel.
awesome. A remodel. That's
Yeah,
right.
Time for a remodel.
Yeah, put some DC heaters in it, maybe split the EQ, give it a second set of tone controls. I don't know. And then use parts that are more easily attainable. Still high quality parts, but parts that are at least attainable, because some of this stuff I have to have custom done for me, or I have to buy existing parts and then modify them to work in the older circuit board and stuff. And it just, I think it's just time for a little, a little evolution. So I think that's going to be in the near future. My Lucky 13 amp, it's kind of got that same AC heater situation going on. So I'm thinking about redesigning the Lucky 13, putting DC heaters in that. And, that'll be a very simple thing. I'm not going to change anything but the heater circuit. So there's that. And then as far as new stuff goes, like, completely new things, I know there's a lot of interest in things for recording, although I think that Synergy has done a very good job of that with the SLO module in their product. So I don't really think I need to explore that, because it's already been done really well. And I've tried it and tested it, and I think it's awesome. So maybe not so much that. So yeah, I don't know. I've got some ideas kicking around, but I'm just not sure what I want to focus on next.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. There was another question, and we actually discussed this, I think, when we had James Brown on, Dave, about the particular design of your loop in the SLO. And
it's an odd one, isn't it?
if you can talk about that, yeah.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about it. It's different. Admittedly, it's different. And I still stand behind my reasons for doing it. But again, I think the way people use amplifiers has evolved a lot since, 1988, or 87, when I designed that loop. And that is, in an SLO, the stock loop is located after all the preamp circuitry, but before the tone stack and before the master volumes, which at the time made a lot of sense, because back then you got to remember that a lot of the stuff that was available was still analog, and analog devices generally had, because of the little clock they had in them that had to kind of run that bucket brigade circuit they had. And again, I'm not a pedal designer guy, so I don't totally understand how all that stuff used to work. It was, it's kind of crazy, but anyway, all I knew, though, from talking to various technicians that did design that stuff, was that this clock operated at a pretty low frequency, so it was almost audible. And so what they had to do is they had to usually put these incredible high pass shunt filters in the devices so that they would bleed off that very top end where the clock was running, so you wouldn't hear that. And so most analog devices, as cool as I still think analog stuff sounds really awesome, but as cool as it is, it doesn't have much top end. It's usually it's kind of rolled off. And the reason is they're trying to mask that clock noise. And so my thinking back in the day was, well, if I put the effect before the loop or before the tone stack, that way you could use the tone stack to correct all the losses that you got going through the effects. Because let's face it, effects nowadays are way more wide frequency spectrum and hi-fi than they were back in those days. As cool as all that old stuff is, and as nostalgic as myself and others are for that stuff, it really sucked if you compare to the modern effects, as far as noise, as far as sampling rates, as far as all that kind of stuff. So because of that, I thought the cool thing to do would be put the loop before the final shaping in the amp, so that the amp could help, rebuild what got lost going through the loop. And that's also why the masters were there, because a lot of those effects weren't unity. Like, you'd put in a really slamming hot signal, but the effect just didn't have enough headroom in its output driver section, so the volume would just tank dramatically. So I figured, well, okay, so you put it before the masters. That way you just crank the masters up higher to compensate for what was lost going through the effects. And so that was my thinking then, and it worked. I mean, it did do what it was supposed to do. It actually, you could put some of that stuff in the loop and make it sound pretty presentable. But nowadays, a lot of guys want to use stomp boxes in the effects. And back then, guys really understood the whole idea of effects loop. It was like the stomp boxes went in front of the amp. The $3,000 Eventide, delay went in the loop. You put the Pro gear in the loop. You put the low signal stuff on the floor. And so, because of that, I also decided to make the loop really hot, because I figured the hotter signal that I can put out and send back, the less noise it's going to pick up in the cords and the cabling and all that, because it'll have a higher signal to noise ratio. So I figured, hey, all that rack stuff can easily handle 0 dB. I'll design the loop at 0 dB because everybody's going to be using professional gear in it. And for many decades, that's exactly what happened. But nowadays, with all of the crazy interest in pedals, which I think is really cool. I think all this pedal mania is actually pretty interesting, because it's creating some pretty amazing stuff that I never thought I'd see before. Some of it's pretty weird and some of it's frankly junk, but there's also a lot of really cool stuff that's coming out. But I'm noticing that everybody wants to be able to take their stomp boxes, their boutique stomp boxes, and put them in an effects loop. Well, many stomp boxes, especially the vintage stuff, are still only, all they can muster is about, minus 10 dB output. So, and they've got really sensitive front ends because they're designed to be used with guitars. So if you hit them with anything hotter than about 0 dB, they can tend to overload. So hence people have had problems, using those in the loop of an SLO or pretty much any of my Hot Rod series amps or anything else. And it's understandable because that's a really hot loop. Now I can mod the loop and take it way down and make it totally compatible with those pedals. And I have done that for many customers. But the thing is, I think what people want nowadays is they want something more like a rack system. They want the loop to be postmaster, so they can just use the front end of their amp strictly as a preamp. They want it to be pretty low signal so that it can be compatible with even a guitar effect pedal. And then they just want to pump it back into the power amp. So probably, and my Hot Rod 25 does have a loop just like that. It's postmaster. It's extremely low signal. You could plug a Dan Electro pedal in there and not overload it. And it's got a lot of gain in the recovery amp, so that even the output of a really feeble stomp box could still get the power amp up to full power. So probably all my future designs, including like, the SLO Mark II, for example, will have a post master type of loop. In fact, one of my bigger and better dealers, well, my best dealer really in Tennessee, suggested that I offer a postmaster loop mod on SLOs. And we just built the first one of those just a few weeks ago for one of his customers, and it turned out really well, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. So I'll be incorporating that in the new version of the SLO. But I think that's the direction loops are going in. Is that something you'd agree with, Dave? I don't even know what your loops are like.
All my loops are just series and pedal level.
Yeah. So you figured that out earlier than I did. So
Yeah.
congratulations.
Basically, it's extremely rare that someone asks me for a line level loop anymore.
Right.
Maybe never in thousands of amps.
Yeah. No, and I can see that now. Yeah. No, I can see where the whole line level thing is completely unnecessary nowadays. Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
So what about your Hot Rod 25 amp? Someone was asking about that. So what is that exactly? Tell people.
So the Hot Rod 25, that was my 25th anniversary amp. And basically what I wanted to do was offer kind of like a preview of what the SLO Mark II is going to be. I wanted, a lot of the guys that bought those amps actually are SLO users, but a lot of these guys call me and go, hey, I'm not playing as big of clubs anymore. I'm doing more home recording. I really love my SLO, but do you have something with less wattage? And I'm like, well, I don't, but I could build something like that. Well, the first thing I would do is steer them into a Hot Rod 50 Plus, but they were like, I want something even smaller, and I want it more compact. I want it to weigh less. I want it to be physically smaller. And so originally I was going to take and make a 2-channel Astroverb. I thought that would be the solution. And that's got a EL84 power section. It's about 20 watts. It's a really cool little amp. But then I started thinking, and I was like, I'd rather do something completely different. And so I still was kind of aiming at that 25 watt power point, but I wanted to do it a little differently. So then I remembered how much I liked old Fender Tremolux amps, because they run 2.6L6s, but it's only a 30 watt amp. And so they've got really low plate voltage. And so it's kind of spongy in the power section. And of course, that was Edward Van Halen's, trick for making those old plexis sound the way they did. He stuck them on a Variac and turned them down to about 88 volts or something. And that power supply, that thing would be lucky if it was putting out 100, or lucky it was putting out 25 watts at that point, because the plate voltage is really low, but you got this great power tube distortion because the tubes would break up really easily, but they were the big tubes. They weren't like, little EL84s. So it's a different kind of thing. It's kind of interesting. So I thought, okay, well, here's what I'll do. I'll build a power section. I'll use two 5881s. I'll build some custom transformers for it that are 25 watt rated, but with a low plate voltage to get those two 5881s down to 25 watts. And then I will apply some of these things I've learned that were, becoming issues with my older designs. So the Hot Rod 25 has DC heaters. It has a Postmaster low-level effects loop. It uses relays for switching instead of Vactex or Vactrols. And so basically I took, again, I'll be honest, I'm somewhat lazy. When I have something that works, I don't bother fixing it. So my overdrive channel's always been my kind of signature sound, and I still think it sounds great. So I took the SLO's overdrive circuitry, the tone stack. I used the crunch channel, but this time I pumped the gain up a little bit on it because I just felt like, there's always room for a little bit more. So I just gave the crunch channel a tad bit more gain. You can still get all the SLO gain settings with it, but now if you go to 11, you get just, like at 9, it's about the same gain as a stock SLO. So it just goes a little bit further gain wise. There is a little bit of a trade-off because when you turn it down for the cleaner sounds, you have to be real careful dialing in, because right now it's between like 2 and 3 is where all the clean happens. But I find that most people that play these amps aren't looking for that super clean. They're looking more for a crunchy clean, like a Bassman kind of breakup clean. So I figured I'd sacrifice a little bit of the lower scale in order to give a little more punch on the top end. And that's what the Hot Rod, and then I built it as physically small as I possibly could. So I fit these transformers, these tubes, all this stuff into an amp that's physically the same size as one of my Astroverb heads. And that's the Hot Rod 25 in a nutshell.
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw it, I'm like, I saw the inside of one, I'm like, oh, DC heaters.
yeah, right. Finally, he got it.
Oh no, it doesn't hum.
that amp's that's a dream amp. I throw one of those together. I take it in the test room. I grab all those tubes that I rejected in the SLOs. I stab them into the Hot Rod 25, and the thing is quiet as a church mouse.
Yeah, that's great.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's awesome. We got a question from Vic Kundra. Mike's thoughts on pedal versus amp distortion, preamp distortion today. Lots of great pedals by Sir, Amp Tweaker, etc. What are the fundamental differences?
Well, that's extremely subjective, and I don't own a lot of pedals, so I can't speak from a lot of experience. So I can tell from what I've heard that there's a lot of really amazing pedals out there, and there's more and more stuff coming out every day, and there's some really brilliant guys doing stuff. I still prefer the sound of a tube being pushed, and
Absolutely.
I don't use pedals at all. I when I play, it's guitar straight into amp. I don't even have a tuner in there. When I go to tune, I unplug the cord from the amp, plug it into the tuner, tune, and then I plug back into the amp. So I'm kind of just an old school purist in that way. Now, am I missing out on a bunch of really cool stuff? I probably am, because there's probably some really fun things to experience playing with some of these pedals and things. But for me personally, I just really like the sound I like the shortest signal path as I can get from the guitar to the speakers and still get the distortion I want. So I prefer hearing it in the amp. But all of that said, I think there is a difference in the sound. I don't think that stomp box pedals sound the same as a high voltage 12AX7 type of distortion circuit. I think they can sound as good as, but in a different way. So in other words, I don't think you can duplicate what a high gain tube amp can do in its preamp with any kind of solid state device, but I think you can make a distortion created by a solid state device that's every bit as cool to listen to, and that hits you in the rib cage just as well, and that makes great records, and that makes rock and roll music that people are going to love to hear. So I think that they're all very valid, but my personal taste still leans towards the old tube, crank the tubes up and make them scream kind of thing. And if I started buying and trying some of these pedals, I'd probably find some that I would probably really fall in love with, just because they would have a certain character that I can't even make tubes do, that I would think was really cool and I'd want to use. So I would say that I'm open-minded to the idea of stomp box solid state distortion, but I haven't had enough experience with it to make a call on it. Although I have a lot of people I go listen to a lot that I see a stock Fender Twin on stage, and they have some kind of pedal on the floor, and I'm loving their sound. I mean, I'm standing there right there in the front row listening to this band going like, these guys are awesome, so it's totally doable. But it's not how I do it.
Right. No, that's cool.
Yeah.
Orlean Jolly has a question, sent that directly to me. He says, on the Soldano Direct page, it says, please note that the only version of the Supercharger GTO available at this time is for 120 volt North American operation. The Supercharger GTO uses a specific wall wart type power supply, and we have not yet been able to source a suitable export, he says, for 220, 240 volt or 100 volt use. He wants to know, does it affect the sound of the pedal to step down transformers?
Okay, so there's a couple answers to that. So the reason I say that is because here in America, you can't buy 240 volt wall warts because nobody uses them here. There's no market for them. Everything in America and in North America, inclusive, Canada included, everything we have is 120. So you can't buy 240 volt wall warts in America because there's just no market. However, they exist in Europe. So what I mean in the instructions that we don't sell a version for export is because I can't go and buy from my distributor a 240 volt wall wart to package in the box and ship it. However, I have sold probably about a dozen superchargers overseas with the note that you can do it two ways. You can either plug it into a step down transformer, which a couple of my customers are doing, but most of my customers just go and buy a 12 volt AC wall wart in Europe, because in Europe everything's 240 volts. So you just go to your Fry's electronics equivalent, and you go in and you say, I need a wall wart with 12 volts AC at 1.5 amps output. And over there, they're going to have it because they're already 240 volt. I just can't buy them here in America. And I feel that it would be not cost effective to import them from Europe, to bring them back here just to put them in a box to ship them back over to Europe again.
Right.
So So what I do is I just basically tell people that you've got 2 ways to go. And to answer the question about the noise, no, none of my customers have complained about having any noise plugging them into a step down transformer. So I tell people that they can either use a step down transformer or they can just source a European made or European supplied 240 volt power transformer or wall wart. And all they have to do is make sure that the wall wart has 12 volts AC output, not DC. Most wall warts are DC output. So you have to look for, it's a little harder finding the AC ones, but they do exist. It just has to be 12 volts AC, and it has to be able to handle 1.5 amps, 1.5 amps, or 100 or 1500 milliamps. And those, according to, like, say, probably about half a dozen of my customers in Europe, they say they're totally accessible. There's, places over there that sell that kind of thing. So we just don't sell a plug and play ready to go version here because I can't get a wall wart that's compatible with European voltage. The pedal will totally work because it's the same pedal. You just plug in, if you plug in 12 volts at 1.5 amps, it will work and it'll do everything it's supposed to do.
All right, cool. Thanks for the question, Arlene Jolly. TWF7847's got a question. And I'm curious about this one too. Can you guys compare and contrast the tone of the BE100 versus an SLO 100?
Dave, since you're the only one that's heard them both probably in the same room at the same time, I'm going to let you answer because I've honestly never had one of your amps in my hands.
Boy, how do we go here? It's hard to kind of put into words. I mean, the SLO's power section is a stiffer power section than ours. It has more filtering in the power section. It doesn't have like a resonance circuit, so it doesn't quite have the same kind of low end girth, so to speak. It has low end though, but it's more in the preamp section of the amp, and it has a certain sort of tonality that's Mike's signature sort of tonality to the preamp section. Mine is although both are rooted in kind of a Marshall bass sort of, mine is more aiming towards the traditional hot rodded Marshall. It's more Marshall, meaning like the BE50 I can dial in to literally sound exactly like my old Plexi on 10, if you turn the knobs just right. So it's definitely more rooted in that classic kind of vintage Plexi JMP sort of tone.
Yeah.
Where Mike is a little more of a take on you kind of made your own thing. So no, it's not really. I was going to say it's kind of started with maybe a JMP hot rodded, which I guess it did from what you were saying, but it hard to put into words. The preamp is a little looser than mine. Mine's a little on the tighter side, but that's just how much low end is in the front end of the amp.
Right.
So. That's the best I can do. Both are great.
Yeah, amen. I mean, I've heard your stuff, Dave. I've just never personally gotten a chance.
I don't think.
But I've heard them, and they sound awesome. I mean, gosh, I listen to the Foo Fighters, and I mean, those sounds are killer.
Yeah. So I mean, thank you. But both are great amps. So
yeah,
amen.
Try them between each other. They're just kind of different flavors.
Exactly.
Different recipe.
Yes, it's a different recipe.
Super cool. Well, good question. Blues Len has a question. And by the way, Mike, we've got tons of questions in the chat, so I haven't even gotten to most of those questions. So you just tell me.
There's maybe not tons. We touched on a bunch of them. But
that's true. That's true.
I was kind of been looking closely.
Scrolling through.
Well, I'm doing fine. But you guys tell me when you want to knock it off. I mean, I'm okay. I'm just hanging out here. I'm having a good time. I'm enjoying this, by the way. I want to let you guys know. Thank you. I'm really having fun. And Dave, I always like chatting with you. We don't do it
Well,
often enough.
it's
We
funny.
really should.
It's funny. The time flies. Because we've already been at it 3 hours and 20 minutes.
God, we have, haven't we? Oh my God! Oh, I just looked at my little clock.
So
here
that's
on
the
the
thing.
computer.
That's what I was telling you when you were first going to come on. I go, yeah, time just sort of vanishes.
Yeah.
Feels like you've been talking an hour. You look down, it's 3, and you're like,
Oh my gosh!
okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Like I
people,
said, I really
enjoy.
enjoy hanging and chatting with you. So this has been a lot of fun. So
Well,
Awesome.
I'm sorry, everyone, that we have to torture you with 3 hours and
yeah, right. Yeah, we apologize.
of us
This is our
talking
party,
stories,
okay?
but some
People
people
seem
say,
to enjoy
man,
it."
it's so long. And I go, yeah, but they somehow always wind up watching the whole thing eventually.
Yeah, exactly.
Or listening to it at least, because it's
And we
available,
have-
on podcast too. If you guys don't realize that.
Exactly. I was just about to say that. Well, if you go on iTunes or any podcast format, you can look us up. We'll be there.
So you don't have to look at us; you can just listen to us.
Yeah, really.
True.
Yeah, spare yourself
True.
that torture. Yeah. Who wants to look at an aging old amp guy here, man? It's like,
no kidding.
All 3 of us, trust me. Blues Len asks for Mike.
Okay.
He says, ask him if he's going to make more YouTube demo videos. There are only good demos on YouTube. Not sure what he means, but are you going to make more YouTube videos?
oh, I imagine there will be some more. I'm technologically limited when it comes to making videos. I don't have a GoPro or anything like that to make. I don't even own a cell phone. I'm probably the last guy on the planet that doesn't own a cell phone. So
Dave
I
mentioned
have
that.
I have no way to make videos myself. So I rely on a couple of my friends up here. They're brothers, Evan and Eric Foster, who are like I just think these guys are the most awesome guys on the planet. Anyway, they're both incredibly talented in a million different ways, but one of them is they make great videos and they're great players. And so when I make my videos, those guys are the ones that are doing it. They're recording the sound, they're shooting the images. Usually I have Evan playing guitar because he's such an amazing guitar player. His brother's equally good. Eric can do that too, but Eric's usually behind the camera. And so it's only when I can coordinate with them to do these that they happen. And these guys are so busy because they're so good at what they do that, we don't get to do it as often. We enjoy it when we get to do it, but we don't get to do it as often as we'd like to because all of our schedules are so nutty. So I'm sure that the 3 of us will converge again sometime in the near future. And when that happens, I'm sure cameras will come out and videos will be made because they're always a hoot to make. I'm always cracking up because I'm so terrible at like reading lines. So I end up ad-libbing everything. And then I get all tangled up in my own ad-lib and these guys are just like shaking their heads. And I'm just like, okay, I'll fix this. Don't worry. I'll save it at the end, but it's fun. We really enjoy it. And I really love working with them. So I'm hoping that we can, if you guys are out there watching, Mikey wants a little attention. He wants to make some videos soon. Let's do it.
That's cool. Awesome. We've got a question here from Dave Bilbro. He wants to know, Dave, and I know the answer to this. Did I see on Instagram you have new speakers coming out?
Yes, I have new speakers from Celestion coming out.
Oh, really? Congratulations. That's very cool.
Although we're having some dilemma on the name with Celestion, so stay tuned for what the name of the speaker is. I don't have an answer on that yet. I tentatively know what it is, but we've changed the name actually from what we originally wanted to call it. So stay tuned.
Cool.
They're done. They're done. They're just waiting for the order of them and final stickers.
What are they voiced like, Dave?
Kind of like the old. I have a cabinet in my shop that is an old cabinet that belonged to Stephen Stills, old Marshall Four cabinet,
cool.
right? That's stripped of the total 70s is stripped of all vinyl, right? So it's shellacked or something, right? So it's like wood. It's got checkerboard grill cloth on it. It was a particle board back cabinet so it's early 70s cabinet, and And in the early 90s, I put in some, because I got it empty, I do believe. In the early 90s, I put in some reissue greenbacks in that cabinet. And now in that era, first reissue of the greenbacks, there was these cones known as the 6402 cones that they used at that era of greenbacks. And that those speakers sound really cool to me. I mean, they sound, well, this cabinet's now quite aged and beat on. But the top end is sweeter, and less sizzly.
Nice.
And the low end has a little more kind of body and girth to it than the newer greenbacks do.
Oh, that sounds great.
And so the funny thing is we developed these speakers and then we put them in a cabinet. And just the other day, I finally did a final listening between that cabinet with a cabinet switcher and the old cabinet, sitting right in the middle of the two, really listening side to side. And they were almost verbatim in tone.
Nice.
The new cabinet was a little bit brighter, but that's brand new speakers. But they were almost verbatim in how the low end reacted and everything. And it's over. It's done. Dead soldier. So I was really happy about that. I was like, perfect, done.
Cool. Congratulations. I'm looking forward to hearing those.
Yeah, they're going to be really cool. Yeah, they're going to be available as an option for our cabinets. You can keep the speakers we currently use, or you can option this Friedman speakers, and they'll also be available as replacement speakers on our website.
Cool.
But not retail sold to dealers, so to speak.
Very cool.
Yeah.
By the way, Sean Tubbs is in the chat watching the show. So
he came late. I told him he's fired.
He may have been hanging with the family. And
that's no excuse.
Am I wrong, or is there another Dave Friedman in the chat? Or is that you, Dave?
No, it wasn't. What I was doing was I was just really quickly, instead of putting my name to answer someone, I was grabbing the whole quote and just pasting it and then answering it.
Oh, gotcha.
So that's probably what you're saying.
Yes. Okay. All right. Perfect.
Sorry for that confusion, but it was just faster when I was trying to do it quickly than sitting there putting at David Friedman or something, or at Sean Tubbs, or or trying to read their name at whoever, Iced Coffee Tones, or
right.
So I was cheating.
I got you. No, I just wanted. I was getting confused there.
Like, dang it, I'm fired again.
Let's see. Okay, here's an interesting question from Aaron Bigsby. For both of you guys, any thoughts yet on new tube technology? Does it sound good? I saw just recently Ibanez is coming out with a tube screamer that has this new tube technology in it. And who else was using it? Vox, right? And there's little mini amps that they came out with. What do you guys think of those, if you know anything about it?
I know about the tube. It looks kind of interesting. But I've heard the Vox little things. They sound kind of neat. I don't know. I don't know how it'll work, and I haven't used it. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, I have no experience with it either.
Okay. You ever see the Z? You guys are familiar with ZVEX, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So ZVEX had originally, way back, he was one of the first guys that I saw that came out with one of those mini 1 watt or half a watt amps that used like a small, super tiny military tube. I don't know the name of the tube, but it's similar to what these new tubes are. And it's still sounding really cool. So, Dave, did you ever hear that before?
The little ZVEX, nano tube, using that.
You got it. Yeah.
Little military tube that has the little pins that come out of it that just bend every which way. And yeah, I can't remember the name of the tube. Yeah, that was neat. It was fun.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw one at the NAMM show once. I thought it was pretty neato. It had little chrome handles on the top of the box. Yeah, it was cool. Yeah, I thought it was pretty neato.
Got the roll bar and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's cool. All right. Well, thanks for the question, Aaron. Dave, let me know if you have any questions that you see.
I don't know. Someone asked Mike what speakers you like.
I'm a big fan of Eminence speakers. I like the Legend 30 they make. I think it's a really nice all-around speaker for it's really versatile. You can do a lot with it. It's you can play lots of different styles of music with lots of different kinds of amps and enclosures, and they always seem to sound pretty darn good. Now that said, again, speakers are incredibly subjective, and the way people perceive sound is often different. So, for example, I have many customers that swear by Celestion Vintage 30s. And the Celestion Vintage 30 is a good speaker. There's no denying it. You know, it's well built, can take a ton of power. But myself personally, just the way my ears hear things, I think that especially paired with my amps, they just have a really obnoxious upper mid-range. And the Eminence Legend, which is basically very similar, I think. I don't know physically if it's similar, but to me it sounds similar. It sounds like a Vintage 30, but with a much smoother and more manageable top end. So obviously a lot of people though don't perceive the top end the way I do, because they think the Vintage 30 sounds wonderful, you know. So it's extremely subjective. It's just like taste buds. Like my niece thinks cilantro tastes like soap. I think cilantro is an amazing little garnish to put on, you know, many kinds of food. I think the stuff tastes wonderful, but it's just how you perceive things, right? So speakers are very much that way. So I always tell people, let your ears decide what's good. But I like the Eminence speakers because A, they're made in America. I like that. And B, the quality is extremely good. I have virtually no problems with those. I mean, they're made well. The people at Eminence have always treated me really well, because being a smaller company, sometimes you go to a place like a speaker manufacturer and you say, hey, I want a custom made speaker with this voicing, and they'll be like, well, are you going to buy, you know, 500,000 of them this year? And like, no, I'm not. I'm going to probably buy 100 from you this year. And most guys won't even do that. Whereas I can go to Eminence and I can order very small quantities and get custom built stuff made for me. In fact, when I first started out, before they actually started offering the Legend 30, they didn't have anything in their line that I liked. So the first speaker they ever did for me and that I ever offered of theirs was a custom made speaker that I had made, you know, for the way I wanted it made. And I didn't do the engineering on it because I'm not a speaker engineer, but I gave them parameters and they nailed it. They built me several prototypes. I tested them. I liked what I heard. And that was our X12000 speakers that we offered for many years. But then when they came out with the Legend 30, they had this, it was an off-the-shelf speaker they made that I found very similar to my X12000s that I could buy in any quantity. And so I've been using those ever since. However, Celestion has a couple that I really like a lot. And one of them is the original G1230Hs. I've got a couple old orange cabinets with those in them. And if you want the classic rock sound of classic rock, those speakers nail it. And so there's a lot of stuff that Celestion makes that I think have very recognizable classic sounds that we all love. And so I would never kick a cabinet out of my shop that had greenbacks or G1230Hs. You know, those cabinets to me, or those speakers to me, just sound wonderful. So they still hold a really nice spot in my heart. And Celestion builds a very high quality product as well. So I would say that between Celestion and Eminence, that would be what you'd find in any cabinet I own, would be either one or the other.
Cool.
There you go.
Good stuff. Oh, there was a question here from M. Fowler. He wrote me about our T-shirts that we just came out with. So, and Dave, then you can give an update on the Friedman T-shirts if you want.
Friedman T-shirts I'll have for NAMM, so they should be here showing up next week at some point.
All right, cool. Save me an extra large, extra large actually. So here are the Tone Talk T-shirts, guys.
Oh, it's a nice looking shirt.
Yeah, thanks.
And actually, you can't see it on the screen as much. It does say our names underneath of it, like the normal logo does.
Yep. So here's the, it says YouTube on the back with the logo. And then I guess when you get a little closer, you'll see it has our names on it.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so if you want these T-shirts right now, I have on order. I'll be getting more medium through double extra large, but M. Fowler, I can get you a triple extra large. So don't worry. I will grab one for you. I'll keep you posted on when I get it. Okay. It's written down. So, but if you guys want to order the shirts, just send me an email, which is tonetalkmarc@gmail.com. Tonetalkmarc, M-A-R-C, @gmail.com. Okay. And we'll be good to go. And I'll just give you the price and tell you how to order it, and then we can send them out to you. So I'll have more right before I leave for NAMM. Okay. Okay. So that little thing there.
Someone asked Mike about your T-shirts. You got T-shirts?
Right now I'm out of them, but I am getting ready to have another batch printed. So there will be T-shirts available probably in another month or so, because the guy who does them for me kind of does them on the side. He's got kind of a corporate, he does a lot of corporate stuff, so he has to kind of squeeze my stuff in amongst his. But about a month out, and we'll have sizes small through XL, and there might even be a few double X's in there somewhere. I kind of just take what he's pretty good at this T-shirt thing, so he just kind of gives me what he thinks is a good variety pack. And so I just get them, and they will be available. Yes. And the best way to order those would be just to send me an email at info@soldano.com, and just, mention what you're looking for size wise and ask for availability, and I'll get back to you with that and give you the amount and the postage and how you do it and all that stuff.
All right, cool. Here's a good question from 667T not B. On which tracks did EVH, now you may or may not know this, Dave, maybe you know, on which tracks did EVH, Eddie Van Halen, use an SLO 100 on, other than Top of the World and Dreams? I don't know if he used it on. Okay.
The whole Fuck album.
The whole
album.
album.
Whole Fuck album.
Whole Fuck album. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole album, other than what I think one track or maybe two tracks where he was using a custom audio preamp on.
Okay.
Cool.
So
that's cool. I didn't know that.
And he used it through a rented cab from Andy Brower's that he later bought with 75-watt Celestions in it.
Oh, that's interesting. The 75s, huh?
He liked the 75s more with the amp because they were kind of a cleaner speaker.
Yeah,
and also
interesting.
less mid-range, and he doesn't really love mid-range. Which is interesting. So he used that cleaner kind of Celestion speaker with the SLO on that record.
Cool.
So other than that, I don't know what I don't think anything after that record was done with the SLO, and I don't, because then the PV thing came in right during that record, and then right on for the tour right after. So and I don't know when he started using it exactly either. So, but what tour was before that? Balance?
I should know this, but I believe it was.
Balance.
Yes, I think it was Balance.
I don't think there. I'm not sure on that record. I'm not sure there. I think he might have had the SLO there too.
I'm not sure.
I know that was a combination. I think of his Marshall and maybe the SLO or something.
That's when he.
Cool.
That's when he went to the wet,
No.
dry, wet.
That was the Marshall. Balance was after that.
That's Pete Thorne talking.
Oh. Then he didn't. Okay. Sorry, that's Pete Thorne talking. So OU812 actually was not a Soldano, though. That was the Marshall still. Yeah.
Mm.
Yep. So actually, Fuck was the first record the Soldano was on. Balance was after Fuck. And Balance had a mix of the Marshall and the Peavey. So for all you Van Halen geeks, there you go.
I should have known. I should have known that. I know right now. I'm getting.
Sorry, I was confused on that. See, for me, actually, all Van Halen records stopped after 1984. So, although I'll give a good runner up to the Fuck record. That was pretty cool. But other than that, forget it. Not for me.
I'll throw them on every once in a while, but the first six, the 6-pack is for me usually. But Dave, did you get this question from EdVed796 where he talked about any thought to creating a 20 to 30 watt amp using 6L6 or EL30?
Yeah, I answered him.
Okay, all right.
I answered in the chat. Yeah.
Okay.
I said maybe.
Okay, cool. Craven Moorhead, any info on Vivian Campbell's rack SLO? I know you mentioned that before. How and why did it come into existence? Did we answer that already?
We didn't really talk about how or why it came into existence. Well, why it came into existence is because Vivian called up and asked for it, basically. So I got the phone call, and he was like, yeah, I heard Luke's amp. I really dug it, but all I need is that overdrive sound, and I need it to be in a rack mountable thing because I'm going to have a rack rig built. And so that was what got me going to build a rack version of the SLO. It's like, okay, I've got to, repackage this thing so it can fit in a 19-inch rack space. And so I redesigned all the chassis, sheet metal, made it so it could fit all the SLO's guts. But the other thing he wanted to do, and it's probably because he was building a Bradshaw system, I think at the time, is he wanted to be able to use the amps just as preamps if he wanted to. So what I did is, so his are the only two that have this configuration. His has a deal so that when you turn off the standby switch, the preamp is still powered up, because in any of my other amps, when you turn off the standby, it also turns off the high voltage on all the preamp tubes as well. But on this one, you could turn off the standby, and then it had an additional tube that I added. There was an output driver to drop the impedance so that it would be a little more compatible with going into, a mixer or whatever. And so I just put a preamp out tube, and it had its own little volume control, if I remember right. I mean, it's still pretty foggy going back to those. I only built two of them, so I don't really remember that well. But the cool thing was he could use it basically as an SLO high gain channel preamp, or he could power up the power section and run it as a full-on amp. And I think part of the thinking behind that was, I think they might have wanted to configure the rack so they could come back in and just use the power sections of those amps as just straight power amps to power after everything went through the rack. So I don't remember the exact details, but it was something he specifically asked for. And so I built his first, and then after those two were done, then I built basically what was a stock SLO, but just in a rack chassis, and that became just the rack SLO. Okay. So I hope that answered the question.
No, that's great. That's great. Rowcamp 56 asked, who are your guitar influences, Mike?
Oh man, there's a lot of them, but probably early on, I have to say it was Eric Clapton, because I was just a huge Cream fan. So Cream was probably my earliest influence in that. That's probably listening to Cream albums was what got me to want to be a guitar player in the first place. That and Jimi Hendrix. So I'd say early on it was Clapton and Hendrix, but as far as once I started playing guitar and learning what playing guitar was all about, I became a huge fan of Carlos Santana, just because there's few players that can really play with the kind of feel that that guy can play with. Well, I mean, there's a lot more nowadays, but back when I was still learning guitar, well, I'm still learning it now. What am I talking about? But when I was first picking up the guitar, so this would be late 70s. Out of, I really liked a lot of the blues guys, but for guys that were just could just really emote like emotion with the guitar, it was Carlos. So I was a huge Carlos fan, and that's part of what influenced me to buy my Mesa Boogie when I did, my first real, honest to goodness real amp. But I also like a lot of other, and I know a lot of people are going to possibly think they're not going to think I'm nuts, but I've had this argument with people because they tell me that this guy's not a great guitar player, but I will strongly defend him as being an awesome guitar player, and that's Neil Young. When you talk about rawness and a guy that can just really pull some crazy sounds out of a guitar, Neil can do it, man. That guy has no limits to what he'll do. I mean, technically, yeah, maybe he's not he's no Randy Rhoads, I'll tell you that, but there's something about Neil's playing I really like, and of course I loved Randy Rhoads. I thought he was awesome. Stevie Ray Vaughan was hugely influential. Not that I can even play a lick of what he does, because I just can't play that way, but I love that sound of somebody just chugging into some really heavy gauge strings and just getting that just super stratty nut. He makes a strat sound like no other strat. So there's that. And then I'm a big fan of surf guitar. So, I like, Dick Dale and a bunch of those crazy nuts that used to play a million notes a second and do that kind of style. Again, something I'm no good at, but I love listening to.
Awesome.
And I'm sure I've forgotten a million others, but those are the ones that kind of always seem to come up in conversations when I'm talking about guitar with people. So Mark Knopfler is another one I forgot. I got to give Mark credit because I just love everything he does. Just again, texturally, and I think it has a lot to do with that finger picking thing he does. And that's also what really draws me to Jeff Beck, is I really like some of the crazy sounds he gets, because you can't really do that with a pick. It's like there's this other thing that you get. And so Jeff Beck is huge, but again, somebody I can't even begin to play like. I watch and listen, and I just go, oh my God, I wish I could do that. So someday I'll keep practicing.
He's so unique.
So unique, yeah. And he's always changing. That's what I also love about him. He's always coming up with something new.
Mm-hmm. That's true. He's changed his style over the years many, many times.
Many times. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So I went through the chat, Dave, and I think we exhausted.
I think we're pretty good. Yeah, exactly.
I think we exhausted most of the questions. So I had just a couple other questions that are just kind of like timely things.
Okay.
Before we kind of wrap things up, but we touched upon this earlier, and I know people want to hear about it. Anybody's thoughts on Gibson not going to NAMM?
Oh, I don't know the politics of the music business, so I didn't even know about that.
They're concentrating more on their CES show.
Yep.
And did you see the guitars at the CES show?
I did. I don't personally get it.
They're out of their mind. It's like they're concentrating more on because they own a lot of pro audio brands now, or consumer electronic brands now.
Oh, I see.
Don't they own who do they own? Is it not JVC or like Techniques or there's some different? I don't know who they own now exactly, but they own a bunch of consumer audio stuff, and so they're focusing more on consumer audio than the guitar business. So there you go. So none of their brands that they own KRK monitors and everything, are going to NAMM.
Right.
Right. Boy, I think they're missing a lot of a big opportunity there.
Well, especially with some pro audio stuff like KRK monitors and things like that.
Yeah.
Like
KRK.
Why aren't they?
You know what? Yeah, yeah, they own Onkyo.
Stanton.
Well, I'm not sure.
I'm looking on the website. So there's Stanton.
Well, okay. Look, frankly, like Mike was saying earlier, it's like frankly the NAMM show maybe doesn't do anything for them to be there. So, but again, it's a pretty big player not to be at the NAMM show.
Yeah, I'd say,
You know,
yeah,
like,
for sure.
And with all their moves in recent times with Henry and oh God, did you see the Dayglow Gibson Les Pauls?
Dayglow Gibson Les
You missed
Paul.
those, didn't you, Mike?
I missed them. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a whole series of Les Pauls that came out with in sort of Dayglow colors. You know.
Well, you got to see this one. I'm going to show this picture because you just got to look at this. I mean, this is just horrible.
Oh yeah, then there's those things.
Oh yeah, no, that's not good.
And
No,
look at the headstock with it.
This headstock is really weird. Yeah.
I mean, I love Gibson. I've got a beautiful Les Paul. I'm a big fan of the brand. I'm not sitting here and bashing them. I don't want to jump on the bandwagon and be like, oh, I'm just shitting on Gibson. I just don't understand where they're headed. It just,
No, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's great.
No, it doesn't make sense. And then they've done so many things that don't make sense. The Les Pauls are even worse than that. The ones, the Dago Les Pauls.
Yeah.
Barf. It's just like there's like a neon blue and like a yellow and you're just like looking at it going, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
It's not
interesting.
It's not like Ibanez circa 1984. You know, who said they wanted that?
Yeah.
What made you think that someone wanted that? So.
Yeah. And the Robo Tuners.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
The most disastrous thing that happened. I remember being at a big store, and I'm not going to say who, and them just like, I can't believe they came out with these guitars, and they told us the sales numbers for like 1 year before those came out, and then the sales numbers for the year after those came out, and it was like an eighth of
right,
just amount of sales. just dive bomb with these Robo tuners.
Yeah,
and I remember my friend that we were at an LA Amp show and Gibson was there. Maybe it was a Guitar Center room, and they had all the new Gibson Les Pauls with the Robo tuners on. And a friend of mine who's no longer with us was with me, and he went in and he was like looking at these guitars, and he's like, how do these work? You know, how does this work? And so there was one guy trying to explain it to him, and he couldn't explain it to him. Then they got another guy over to show him how it works and how to explain it to him. And then he was having problems getting it to work right. And then my friend's just like, fuck this. I could have tuned the whole guitar myself by now. I just wanted to tune this one string, and I could have just tuned it.
Unbelievable.
Like,
yeah, I never understood that.
Like disgust, and he was just like, ah.
Yeah, it's not good.
So
interesting stuff. All right, well, that was all I had. I know, Dave, you're going to be at NAMM. We're going to be at NAMM.
The rumor has it that I'm going to be at NAMM. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, you guys have fun at NAMM, okay? I'll be thinking of you.
Yeah.
You will.
It'll be fun. It'll be fun.
You never know, Mike. You might be doing it next year.
Might be. Could happen. Yeah.
That's cool. Oh, there was one last question I was thinking, Mike. Did you ever work with any, since you're in Seattle and you moved back in '94, did you ever work with any of the Seattle bands back in the day?
That's a good question, and it's really weird. Something, I came back here thinking that I'd be able to get some interest from all these guys because the scene was really happening here. I couldn't sell an amp to somebody in Seattle to save my life. It was like Boogie had already driven through here with the semi truck full of rectifiers and given them all away, apparently. And so every band, you'd go anywhere and all you saw was Boogie dual rectifiers.
Oh, that was
And
just killing you.
it was killing me.
Oh,
And so,
God.
no, I never worked with Soundgarden, never worked with Pearl Jam, never worked with Alice in Chains. Now, when I was still in LA, I had sold an SLO to Jerry Cantrell. So, I mean,
Yeah.
he did have one, but that's when I was still in LA. So that was before I came back here. And you know, and I eventually, I mean, it took a long time, but I eventually met some of these guys. But no, they, you know, like, oh yeah, I guess we've heard of your stuff, but no, we got these boogies, they're fine, they're great, you know. It's like, no, so I had nothing to do with any of the sounds of the grunge movement. It was weird. It was really strange to me because I would think that, hey, I'm one of your guys, you know. I'm back.
I'm back. I'm home.
I'm back. And they didn't want anything to do with me. Seriously, it was really weird.
That's funny. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that was another question that just popped in my head. All right, cool. Well, Mike, I can't thank you enough for joining. Your stories were amazing. Just
4 hours.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's nuts. Well, I really enjoyed it. So I was having fun, and that's how the time flew. So I thank you guys for, you know, having me on. This has been a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Yeah,
awesome.
Absolutely.
Please tell people where they can reach you, Mike, and where they can buy your amazing products.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm here at Soldano Custom Amplification. We're in Seattle. You can either call, it's 206-781-4636, or you can send email to info at soldano.com. Dealer wise, you can find them in Musician's Friend. They don't stock a lot of our stuff, but they have some of it. Guitar Center stores can do special orders for you. However, if you want to go to a dealer that stocks everything we make and gives great customer service, I recommend Blues City Music in Tennessee. And so and then in other countries, Station Music in Germany, Sounds Great in England, Noise Toys in Australia, New Zealand, and other places you'll have to look because some of our little boutique shops in other parts of the world seem to come and go. So anyway, yeah, and of course you can find us at www.soldano.com.
Awesome. And everybody check out Friedman Amps, Dave Friedman stuff, of course.
By all
amazing
means.
stuff. Yes, check that out. And again, shirts, they're going to be coming in. So I don't want to sound like I'm a salesman, but if anybody wants these shirts, email me, tonetalkmark@gmail.com. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button as well. And we will be back after NAMM. You'll see some new content coming from the channel, and some nice surprises. So it'll be good. We're looking forward to it. Dave, I will see you in LA in a couple weeks, or in like a week and a half or so.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks again, guys. I really appreciated being on here, and I enjoyed myself. So thank you.
Yeah, stay on for a minute before we sign off.
Thank you. I'm going to end the broadcast. Everybody have a great night, great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.